The Let's Go Live button, so let's make sure that the stream is alive and well across the internets. If you're not familiar with the program, we do multi-stream on a number of different platforms. Let's make sure that things are moving and grooving. Looks like we are live. So let's get started. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have represented thousands of good people facing criminal charges. We help them navigate through the criminal justice system. And over our time in practice, we have seen a lot of problems with that very system. I'm talking about misconduct involving the police. We have prosecutors behaving poorly. We have judges not particularly interested in a thing called justice, and it all starts with the politicians, the people at the top, the ones who write the rules and pass the laws that they expect you and I to follow, but sometimes have a little bit of difficulty doing so themselves. And so that's why we started this show called Watching the Watchers, so that together we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency back down upon that very system. And that's why we're so grateful that you are here and with us. Happy New Year. Welcome back to 2021. We're very excited that you're here. We have a lot to get into today. We're glad that you're going to be joining us all this week because we're together going to be witnessing the electoral meltdown of politics in America. It's going to be a bizarre week. Should be a lot of activity, a lot of interesting things going on. We're going to get into most of it today. We've got this new call that has been leaked by the Washington Post that involved Donald Trump and his attorneys with Brad Raffensperger and his attorneys, and it leaked out and everybody's all in a tizzy about it, very upset. On one side, they're saying that Donald Trump was trying to coerce Brad into going and finding 11,000 votes. On the other side, if you're on the Trump camp, you're just saying, listen, he was out there just kind of, going at this guy saying, hey, maybe you should do your job, investigate the election, and the votes would be found if you did what I was, asking you to do. And so we're going to break that call down because it is interesting. Remember, we've got the Georgia elections tomorrow. And so this is sort of like an October surprise in January. There's going to be a lot of, acrimony about this phone call, but we're going to break that down and see, is there anything really criminal in there? Is this really worse than Watergate? Is this really the Don, the big godfather who's out there trying to flex his muscle and get different secretaries of state to do his bidding? We are going to break it down. We're also going to give you an update on the Electoral College objections. Remember, on Wednesday, that is when the House, in a joint session of Congress, is going to be counting the electoral votes that came in from all the various states back on December 14th. They certified them, they sent them all over, and now this week they're going to be counting them. For a long time, we've been analyzing or asking ourselves who is going to be objecting, if anybody. Last week we learned that Josh Hawley was going to be doing so, and then there was going to be this, what I was expecting would be sort of the floodgates would be opened, and we'd hear this roaring stampede of other senators who wanted to go in and join in on the feeding frenzy, and that's exactly what we got over this long New Year's break. We see that Ted Cruz and a number of other Republican senators will be objecting. We've got some reaction. We have sort of a breakdown on where the different congresspeople fall. Some are objecting, some are refusing to object, some are in the middle, sort of like, let's wait and see. Well, there's a lot of questions, and I'm open to asking questions, but I'm not going to object, and I'm not going to object. So we want to sort of decipher what is going on there so that we can be ready for the grand poobah event, which is going to be taking place on Wednesday. We also know some more about the rules that are going to be taking place on Wednesday, and then we're going to wrap up the show with some Canadian badpopo. They exist all around the world, folks. It's not just in Arizona. Over New Year's, there was a video about some cops going in and sort of breaking down this New Year's Eve party. There were 6 people apparently having a good time. Not allowed in Canada. Not allowed in a lot of places here in the United States either. And so we want to talk about that story. Before we get into all of it, I want to thank you once again for being here. I'll ask you to subscribe to our channel. We go live at this time every day of the week. We're going to be doing so for the foreseeable future. We want you to be a part of this conversation. A like, a share, a comment would also be very helpful as well. If you're not familiar with the format, the way that we go through this is I'm going to present for maybe an hour today. There's a lot of material. We have a lot of reading. We're going to look at the primary source documents. We're going to look at the actual transcripts of the call, watch some videos, and break it down by looking at the real documents, not just the headlines. And then at the end of the presentation, is when we'll have our live chat. So if you have any super chats or any questions that you have for me, we will get those at the end of the program. You don't have to wait till the end to send them because Miss Faith is right back there. She's clipping all of those super chats and sending them our way. As another reminder, we have a Discord chat server. So if you want to chat with us before or after the show, carry on the conversation, you can do that in our private free Discord server. The link is down below in the description. And so let's get into it. I want to start with the phone call. The phone call has been all over the headlines, starting with CNN. You're going to see it's covering most of their homepage. We see here right in the middle, they've got Trump could be in legal jeopardy after pressuring a Georgia official. Some public officials are calling for a criminal probe. Oh my goodness, that's my area of law. And to whether the president broke the law when he asked the Secretary of State to find 11,870 votes. And underneath that headline, you see a whole slew of other headlines. Fact-checking Donald Trump's call. The White House tried calling Georgia 18 times and so on. On the left, we have some more updates from today about the Georgia election officials because there is an election tomorrow in Georgia. So they're really going hard on sort of looping this all into one. On the right, that's when we get to our comments, right? Our opinion pieces. They're all, of course, about Donald Trump, the phone call, and the election. When we go over to Washington Post, same story. Their headline is Trump pressures the GOP in Georgia to, quote, find the votes. In a 1-hour phone call on Saturday, legal scholars described as a flagrant abuse of power and a potential criminal act. President Trump berated Brad Raffensperger, begged him to act, and threatened him with vague criminal consequences if the Secretary of State refused to pursue his false claims. And the reason why we're going through this is because I just want you to understand sort of what the mainstream is telling you, and then we're going to go through. We're going to read the transcripts, and you can make your own decisions, right? You can compare and contrast. Is Donald Trump begging him to act? Is he threatening him with vague criminal consequences? Is he berating Brad, right? Was this a flagrant abuse of power? That's the type of language that is being used by the Washington Post and many other agencies, right? And this is supposed to be a news story. There's a lot of opinion adjectives in there, flagrant and potential criminal. You know, there's a lot going on in there that, in my mind, doesn't really count as news, sort of a lot of opinion language in there, but that is from the Washington Post. Now, even on the Drudge Report, which is no fan of Donald Trump, major red headlines here, folks, that he may face criminal charges in Georgia because he wants to find 11,000 votes. Trump caught on tape trying to rig the results and so on. Up in the top left, you see there as a standard on Drudge, sort of coup fever. Dems ask the FBI to open a probe. The U.S. attorney resigns and the Republicans defend the phone call. So we need to talk about the phone call, and let's look at sort of the opposite reaction. So there is this guy by the name of David Schaefer, who is the Georgia GOP head, in my understanding of that's his position. He says that in response to the leaking of the phone call, David Schaefer says President real Donald Trump has filed 2 lawsuits, federal and state, against the Georgia Secretary of State. The telephone conference call secretly recorded was a, quote, confidential settlement discussion of that litigation, which is still pending. So another thing that we want to keep our minds around is whether or not this was a settlement discussion, a settlement conversation, because things are a little bit more lax in a settlement conversation, right? You have a little bit more of a free range to have a genuine, candid conversation. That's the whole point of having a settlement conference. If you're going to just sit there and not talk about anything, then the settlement is probably not going to happen because there's no conversation taking place. So a settlement conference by its design is intended to settle things, and that means that you have an open dialogue back and forth. In criminal law, the way that we do this in a settlement conference is it's kind of free range. Everybody goes into a judge's chambers or the courtroom. We're off the record. The courtrooms are totally evacuated. There are no clerks or anything like that. We're kind of sort of on the record, but not really, meaning that we're in court in front of a judge with a prosecutor there. We are there with our defendant clients. And it's being recorded, but anything that is being said in that settlement conference cannot be used against the defendant. And the reason why this is so important is so you can have a candid conversation about it. So your defendant, our client, can come into court and say, hey, Mr. Prosecutor, what if I did go to trial? What would my consequences be? Or what if I had a friend who, had something else to add to this conversation? And you can just be genuine and candid, and the judge will sort of moderate the conversation between the defense and the prosecutor's office. And like I said, the whole point of this thing is so that you can talk openly, freely, without having any recourse. And so what the defendant could even ask the prosecutor, he could say, hey, why are you being so aggressive to me? Why do you want me to go to prison for 7 years? And the prosecutor can return and say, here's my perspective on it. This is how it's working. This is what my boss is requiring of me. This is what the statute says. This is the evidence that was in front of me. And this is how I plan to prosecute the case. And the defense can say, okay, well, what about this and this and this and this? And the judge can say, that's a good point, defense. And what do you think about that, Mr. Prosecutor? And so on. It's a settlement. It's supposed to be open. It's supposed to be candid. And we have to ask ourselves whether that was happening during this phone call, right? Whether they were trying to resolve this. And we're going to see some conflicting language. So we see from David Schaefer that this sounds like it was a confidential settlement agreement, or settlement discussion is what he says. But then Amy Gardner says, nope, this was false. We published the entirety of the call from start to finish. There is no mention of it being a confidential settlement meeting, not one. All right, so we're going to have to take a look and see if we can get it. This is in response to a post, once again, by David Schaefer, who says this audio published by the Washington Post is heavily edited, omits the stipulation that all the discussions were for the purpose of settling litigation and confidential under federal and state law. So Amy is saying, no, that's false. We published the entirety of the call. And we're going to go through the transcripts because we have them now. And so, the big sort of question here is, well, was this conversation protected? Is it within the confines of a settlement agreement? Or is that just their attempt to cover up for Donald Trump, who, of course, is a monster who is just trying to undermine democracy every which way he turns? Well, we're going to look at the language and see what the parties who were there and a part of the call, we'll see what they have to say about it. Donald Trump also was sort of magnifying this claim. He said this on January 3rd, which was yesterday, so early Sunday morning. He said, he posted this on Twitter, I spoke to Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger yesterday about Fulton County and voter fraud in Georgia. He was unwilling or unable to answer questions such as, quote, ballots under the table scam, ballot destruction, out-of-state voters, dead voters, and more. He has no clue. And then Brad responded back, Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State from Georgia. He said, respectfully, President Trump, what you're saying is not true. The truth will come out. And then another guy by the name of Jason Miller says, and the full recording will show that the Georgia Secretary of State is still a hack. Donald Trump is spot on in his criticisms of the terrible job that Brad Raffensperger did, and all of the officials running Georgia's elections are trash. POTUS won the state. All right, so a lot of back and forth, sort of the standard Twitter squabble, kind of like high school gossip going back and forth. You did this, no, I didn't, you did that, and so on. And so let's take a look at what the actual text says. Before we get there, another reaction. So this is funny. We see this a lot. Everybody compares everything to Watergate. And I caught this, and then I saw another post on Twitter by a guy named Greg Price. So apparently, Carl Bernstein is out there saying that Donald Trump and this phone call are the ultimate smoking gun, and indicates that he's a criminal president. So what he says at the final piece of this quote, he says, Bernstein said, this was something far worse than Watergate. All right, so Carl Bernstein's out there, and there's a lot of headlines. Oh my gosh, is this worse than Watergate? This is worse than Watergate. Did you see this? This thing could be worse than Watergate. Oh my goodness. Well, Carl Bernstein has said that a lot, and so have a lot of these other media people. Back on November 3rd, 2017, Carl Bernstein said on this quote, on this article from The Hill, said, if Trump colluded with Russia, it's, quote, worse than Watergate. Funny, on September 10th, 2020, Carl Bernstein, Bob Woodward's old reporting partner, says the tape of Trump admitting to downplaying COVID is worse than Watergate. Right. And then on November 2nd, again, probably similar to the Russia story, says that the Russia probe feels worse than Watergate. And so this guy by the name of Greg Price 11 on Twitter, at Greg_Price 11, go check him out. He went around the internet and consolidated all those. And so it's sort of, when I see stuff like this, literally the day before an election, it just feels like an October surprise in January. It's not that big of a deal. It's a phone call, has a bad sort of snippet of the transcript that comes out. They ran with that, sort of implying that Trump wanted Brad Raffensperger to go into Georgia and just conjure up 11,000 votes. Well, I didn't listen to the whole thing. I read the whole transcript. I listened to some parts of it. Kind of a hard audio to listen to just because a lot of dead air and sort of, back and forth, and people are just, it's kind of difficult to listen to. So the transcript helps much more than the audio did. So let's dive into it. All right, so let's set the scene a little bit. Mark Meadows is the president's chief of staff, and he was there doing an introduction. So my understanding is this was a conference call. I don't know if it took place over Zoom or not, but it was a call where a number of people are on the line. So Mark Meadows, the president's chief of staff, opens it up. He says, "All right, Mr. President, everyone is on the line. This is Mark Meadows, chief of staff. Just so we are all aware, online is Secretary of State and two other individuals. So that's going to be Brad Raffensperger, Jordan, and Mr. Germany. And those individuals are Brad Raffensperger, Jordan Fuchs, who's the Deputy Secretary of State. So one under Brad Raffensperger, and then Mr. Ryan Germany is also with him, who is the Office of General Counsel." Okay, so we got to pause on that. So the president's on the line, Brad Raffensperger's on the line. There's a lot of litigation between the Trump team, the Raffensperger team, the Secretary of State who runs the elections in Georgia. They're both on the call. So those would technically be sort of the clients. And then they have their attorneys there. They have Mr. Ryan Germany, who is the Office of General Counsel for Georgia. Then we also have Mark Meadows, who's the chief of staff. And he says here that we are also joined by these people who represent the president, Kurt and Alex, and Cleta Mitchell, who is not the attorney of record but hasn't been involved, myself, and then the president. So, Mr. President, I'll turn it over to you, he says. So Kurt Hilbert and this other guy, Alex, we don't know who he is, but Kurt Hilbert and Cleta Mitchell, my understanding, are both attorneys. Okay, so Trump, Raffensperger, both sides have legal counsel present. Sort of sounds like a settlement conference to me, right? This wasn't just sort of a haphazard phone call. "Hey, Brad, this is Trump. What's going on in there?" Right? If you want to call somebody and pressure them to do something, do you do it with your attorneys on the phone? 3 of them? Do you do it with the other side's attorneys on the phone? 2 of them? Or their deputy and a lawyer for the state? Not really, right? You would do something offline that would be malfeasance. All of this stuff is taking place in and right in the open. All right, so let's get into it. Now, it's a weird, I would say, ineffective call in general, right? Donald Trump, when he goes off, so Mark Meadows turns the call over to him, and he just goes off. And he must have had a list in front of him of sort of all of the bullet points of the different allegations of fraud and problems that he has identified in Georgia. And it's just a laundry list. I mean, he just goes off. It's like, "Here you go, Mr. President. Here's a mic. You might as well just go make a sandwich, because when you come back, he's going to keep going." He says, "Okay, thank you very much. Hello, Brad and Ryan, everybody. We appreciate time for the call. So we've spent a lot of time on this. If we could just go over some of the numbers, I think it's pretty clear we won. We won very substantially in Georgia." He says, "You can even see it by the rally size, frankly. We'd be getting 25 to 30,000 people a rally, and the competition would get less than 100 people, and it never made any sense." And so this was sort of the first moment where when you're reading through this, you're like, well, we don't elect people based on rallies. So what are you talking about rallies for? That a lot of people in the media have sort of teed off on this thing. Well, he's talking about rallies, and the Biden campaign wasn't even thinking about rallies, and so it's sort of a weird measure. And I would agree with that. It is kind of a weird measure, right? Nobody really cares about the rallies. It's indicative of sort of a lower level problem here that Trump had a lot of enthusiasm. Biden, from our other measures, from just a standard viewership angle, it's hard to see how much enthusiasm or support he had, because he didn't do much of that stuff. But the converse of that is, well, he didn't try to do any of that. He wasn't attempting to have 35, 25,000 people rallies. He was trying to fly under the radar. So it's kind of a weird comparison. But then Trump just goes off. He just keeps going, bullet point by bullet point by bullet point. So I'm not going to read the whole thing. We've been here for 45 minutes. But these are a couple highlights. He says, look, we have a number of different things. We have at least 2 or 3 or anywhere from 250 to 300,000 ballots dropped mysteriously into the rolls. Okay, so that's one bullet point that Trump was talking about. Mysterious ballots being dropped into the rolls. He says another bullet point. He says we had, I believe, it was about 4,500 voters who voted, but who weren't on the voter registration list. So 4,500 voted. They had to be. He said 18,325 vacant address voters. The address was vacant. They're not allowed to be counted. That's 835. And so he's just going down and sort of adding up the numbers. You also had out-of-state voters. They voted in Georgia, but they were from out of state. 4,925, he mentions. You had absentee ballots set to the vacants. They were absentee ballots sent to vacant addresses. They had nothing on them but the address. That's 2,326. Smaller number, you had 904, where they just had a P.O. box. That's not allowed. We had at least 18,000 that's on tape. We had them counted very painstakingly 18,000 voters having to do with blank. And they're blocking out the name of the woman who was at the the Staples Center counting the votes. He's saying they counted them multiple times. Donald Trump says, quote, she's a vote scammer, a professional vote scammer and hustler. That was a tape that's been shown all over the world. It makes everybody look bad, you, me, and everybody else. And so he just kind of goes on for a while, right? He's just reading all of the different bullet points. Somebody probably handed him a memorandum right in front of them, and he's just going down saying this is all of the problems that we have seen out of Georgia. And nothing really new there, right? We've talked about almost all of these issues. Some I think are pertinent, some are not pertinent. I think some have merit, some don't. Some justify further inquiry, and others just don't, right? And some of those were included in his litany, which I think was a mistake, because he's talking about a lot of stuff that is easily debunked. And the problem with sort of commingling the good evidence with the bad evidence is now what the other side does is they look at the bad evidence and they just make believe that they can extrapolate that into the good evidence. And so this call, in my mind, was ineffective in that regard. Donald Trump was sort of using the fire everything at the wall and see what sticks approach by just going through the laundry list, the litany of all the problems that they've identified in Georgia. Well, some of those are easily debunked, right? We've talked about some of them on this program, while the other stuff that is worthwhile and worth investigating is now glossed over, or it's lumped into the same stigma bucket that these other claims are going to be lumped into. So I think a little bit bad in terms of the preparation. I think his delivery was very Trumpy, right? He's going through and he's very angry. I think legitimately he believes he certainly won this thing, and he thinks that there may have been an opportunity to see some movement on the ball. Now, I also don't know that this was even worth a phone call, right? I don't even know that it was worth having. When you listen to it, or you listen to clips and bits and pieces of it, I don't get the sense that anybody on the opposing side was interested in settling anything. Right, we're going to get to the end of the conversation where they're asking if there's something that they can do about it. And Raffensperger and his team are basically saying, we'll look into it. We'll have our guys call your guys. We'll set something up. And you're like, well, there's an election on Tuesday and they're counting the votes on Wednesday. When are you going to get back to us? Can you pick up the pace on that? Can you give us an answer? But I didn't think that they were quite frankly, I'm not even sure that they had any respect for the president's team. They were using respectful language, but the way that they were communicating with them, I sort of sensed a little bit of disdain in their voice. And you could argue that that's reasonable, right? They've been dealing with this election stuff for 2 months. They're probably sick to their ears about it. They're getting beaten up by both sides, both the Republicans and the Democrats. They're probably just ready for this thing to be over. No excuse in my mind to not enter into a settlement agreement in good faith or to try to resolve something. But at the conclusion of this, we're going to find that I don't think anything came of it. I don't think anything got settled, and the whole call was sort of a waste of time. So if Donald Trump and his legal advisors were hoping that by having this call that they were going to get Raffensperger to go in, grant them more access, go in and audit something, here are the files, we're going to see there's a lot of information that Trump's team is requesting, it's just unsettled. Whether Raffensperger or anybody in Georgia is going to give him anything is highly doubtful as a result of this. And so if you're going to go into a settlement conference and not get anything resolved, you might want to have a different strategy, right? A different reason for going in and doing that. And we're seeing different rationales being thrown out all over the place today. On the one side, a lot of the times what you'll do with a settlement conference is it's for the benefit of the client, right? It's for the benefit of Trump. Trump's lawyers would bring him in. They'd say, all right, listen, Mr. Trump, we don't think there's any fraud here. If you think there's fraud, have at it. Here's a list of all the potential fraud. You can go after Raffensperger. Ask him all the questions in the world. Ask him. Ask him about that. Ask him about the absentee votes. Ask him about the dead votes. Ask him about Dominion and taking apart the machines. Have it all. Go have a free-for-all. And then the attorneys will just sit there and go, right? Trump asks a question. Raffensperger responds. They look back to their counsel, and their counsel just goes, yeah, see, look, they got an answer for that. Okay, we told you they had an answer. You didn't believe us. Now you hear it from them. What do you want us to do about it? Right? So it could be his counsel sort of leading him astray a little bit, saying, well, we're just going to throw him in there. He can make all the claims in the world. They're going to rebut them, and it's going to make the attorneys look good. They're sort of on the other side. They have an unreasonable client in Donald Trump. They want to present him to the opposing side. The opposing side can answer all of his questions. Then the attorneys can say, see, we told you so. Look, we tried. Nothing we can do. The opposite of that is if you're in Team Trump and if you're in sort of that that camp that you say Donald Trump is playing, 35 dimension chess. Well, the point of this call is to get them on the record making certain claims, right? So you would go into a settlement conference, get the opposing side to stake out a position. If you know something based on where they're landing in their position that's going to give you an opportunity to improve your position, then a settlement conference can be used as sort of leverage in that regard. Okay. We want to see how far they'll come towards you. If they will give you some indication that there's a little bit of wiggle room here, or they're willing to compromise on these key facets, now you have more information that you didn't have before you went into the settlement conference. And so people who are thinking that this was all sort of strategic and well planned and executed are saying, well, look, I mean, the Georgia Secretary of State and his entire legal team just sort of hung themselves out to dry. They said they were doing investigations into all this stuff. We know that they weren't. We know that they have information that we need that they have not given to us because Trump's attorneys bring it up a few times. Maybe that's an opening, right, into another motion, a motion to compel disclosure, a motion to get the information. We'll see. So Donald Trump goes through his laundry list. Mark Meadows picks back up the conversation. He says, so, Mr. President, if I can jump in here, I'll give Brad a chance. Mr. Secretary, obviously, there are allegations where we believe that not every vote or fair vote and legal vote was counted, and that at odds with the representation from the Secretary of State's office. What I'm hopeful for is there some way we can find some kind of agreement to look at this a bit more fully. We know the president mentioned Fulton County. So right there, right? Can we find some kind of an agreement? What does that sound like? A settlement, right? Can we come to a resolution? Can we come to some kind of an agreement here? Can we settle this thing? We know the president mentioned Fulton County. He says, Meadows goes on, he says, but in some of these areas where there seems to be a difference of where the facts seem to lead. And so, Mr. Secretary, I was hopeful that, in the spirit of cooperation and compromise, is there something that we can at least have a discussion to look at some of these allegations to find a path forward that's less litigious? That's exactly what we're talking about, right? This is settling litigation. It's settling further inquiry. Mark Meadows, the president's chief of staff, he mentions that twice. Looking for some kind of an agreement, looking for cooperation and compromise. And, we see that language sort of throughout this call. Raffensperger was responding to Donald Trump, and he sort of just goes back and rebuts every one of Trump's points. Not every one of them, but he's sort of taking them in turn. So here's what he has to say throughout the 45 minutes. And it's not much. So his responses are very short. When you look at this or when you listen to this, you'll see that Trump talks for like 10 minutes. Raffensperger talks for 1. Trump says 100 sentences. Raffensperger says 2. Okay, it's very sort of dismissive and not particularly responsive to a lot of the issues. You can tell Raffensperger is very frustrated. And so I'm going to do the same thing. I just clipped out a couple of different bullet points that Trump hit. Let's look at how Raffensperger responded. He says, well, I listened to what the president just said. President Trump, we've had several lawsuits we've responded to in court to the lawsuits and the contentions. We don't agree that you have won, and we don't. I didn't agree about the 200,000 number that you mentioned. I'll go through that point by point. And he doesn't really do that because Trump takes over again. Trump is very commandeering of this conversation. But at a different point, Raffensperger responds to the State Farm video, which is that video where they were pulling the suitcases or the ballot suitcases, the ballot boxes out from under the tables and then counting them after the observers had been excused, right? There's reasonable debate or points of contention about what happened there. On the one side, the Democrats say that those observers left voluntarily. They just left on their own. But they came back a few hours later when they knew that they were still counting again. So why did they leave and then come back if they were not told to leave? And there's been a number of other witnesses confirming that they were told to leave before the counting continued. So, this is one of those things that you can dispute this, right? You can have reasonable arguments both directions. Here's how Raffensperger responded. He says, you're talking about the State Farm video. I think it's extremely unfortunate that Rudy Giuliani or his people, they sliced and diced that video and took it out of context. The next day, we brought in WSB-TV. We let them show. We see the full run of the tape. And what you'll see, the events that transpired are nowhere near what was projected, And then it cuts off to somebody else again, probably Trump. So Raffensperger is sort of talking about what Rudy Giuliani and his team did with the tape. We probably played some of that here. But that's kind of off the mark, right? The actual point of contention here was that they were told to go home because the counting was going to stop, and then the counting started again, even though the observers were not in the room. As soon as the observers found out that they were still counting, even though they had previously been told to leave, they came right back. So, a lot of this stuff that Trump brings up, Raffensperger sort of not really responding to. They're sort of missing the mark repeatedly. Raffensperger goes on. He says, Mr. President, they did not put that. We did an audit of that, and we proved conclusively that they were not scanned 3 times. And this is where he was talking about that woman who was on video, looked like that she was just, scanning something through, picking up the stack again, putting it on top of the scanner, scanning it through again, picking it up, putting it on top. You're like, what the heck is going on there? And there could be some reasonable explanations for that. Maybe she was calibrating the machine. Maybe those were cleaning sheets or something, to sort of get the dust out of there. I have no idea, right? I don't work at an election polling center, but maybe there is a valid explanation for that. Or maybe she was scanning the ballot 3 times. So Raffensperger says, we did an audit. We proved conclusively that they were not scanned 3 times. Another point, Raffensperger just says, listen, we had the GBI investigate that. So Trump mentions a problem. He says, we had the GBI investigate that. Germany chimes in. He says, listen, this is Ryan, Germany. We look into every one of those things that you mentioned. And so that's just kind of the pattern here. Trump has a big paragraph about why he's upset. They respond and say, we looked into that. We checked it out. We did this, we did that, and so on. And this is the problematic part of the clip. So this is what everybody is up in a tizzy about. And this is where Donald Trump is going through one of his paragraphs, right? So like I said, a lot of this is Donald Trump, and then it's a call and response. The responses are much shorter. This is where the problematic text comes in. This is what everybody's talking about. So let's look at the whole thing. This is the paragraph that says, you can see highlighted here, I just want to find 11,780 votes. So that is what is being taken out of this context. Let's read the whole thing in its entirety. Trump says, listen, he's going on and on and on and on. The paragraph picks up. He says, but I won't. We have some incredible talent. They've never seen anything. Now, the problem is they need more time for the big numbers, but they're very substantial numbers. I think what you're going to find, by the way, a little information, I think you're going to find that they are shredding ballots because they have to get rid of the ballots because the ballots are unsigned. The ballots are corrupt. They're brand new and they don't have seals. There's a whole thing with the ballots, but the ballots are corrupt. And you're going to find that they are, which is totally illegal. It is more illegal for you than it is for them because you know what they did and you're not reporting it. That's a criminal offense. And you can't let that happen. That's a big risk to you and to Ryan, your lawyer. That's a big risk, but they are shredding ballots, in my opinion, based on what I've heard, and they are removing machinery and they're moving it as fast as they can, both of which are criminal fines. And you can't let it happen. So you are letting it happen. I'm notifying you that you're letting it happen. So look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have because we won the state. And flipping the state is a great testament to our country because, this is a testament. It's a testament that they can admit to a mistake or whatever you want to call it. If it was a mistake, I don't know. A lot of people think it was a mistake. It was much more criminal than that, but it's a big problem in Georgia, and it's not a problem that's going away. It's not a problem that's going away. And so a lot of people are really latching onto I just want to find 11,780 votes. And I got to be honest, this paragraph does not sound good, right? This is probably one of those paragraphs where his attorneys were sort of cringing a little bit. Right? Because what's happening here, the problem with some of this language is that it's conflating. It's a little bit too close. If you look at the paragraph, he's talking about potential criminal charges for the Secretary of State and for his attorneys. Right? He's just sort of mentioning that. By the way, guys, if you don't properly investigate these claims, you may be opening yourself up to criminal liability, which is true. Right? If they're not investigating claims and there's more evidence that comes out that says that these guys were doing something involved with malfeasance, could they expose themselves to liability? Yeah, technically it's true. Is it likely? Probably not. Are these guys going to get charged with anything? Probably not. We've had many super chats on this channel where people ask me, is there going to be any repercussions for any of these election officials? And my response has always been no, right? Because they're government officials. They're protected by qualified immunity. As long as they're having sort of good faith attempts at doing their job, then they're going to be immune from any criminal liability. And so what Trump is doing here is sort of conflating the two. I think he's bringing it just awfully close to sort of hinting at if you don't go find these votes, this could be a problem for you. I can see that interpretation of it. The other interpretation, though, guys, is just this is the reality, okay? Donald Trump is on a phone call in a settlement conference trying to communicate to people that their exposure here is big, that he's got a lot of information. He's sort of, discussing it to them, saying, listen, I know you run your elections. You've got an obligation to run them legitimately, accurately, credibly, following the law. I've got information that says you were not following the law. I've got evidence here that may implicate you criminally. So I'm just telling you to do your job, right? That's another, I think, reasonable interpretation of this thing. He's the president. They are, state officials. They're having a settlement conference. They're talking about issues that you talk about in a settlement conference. That's all it is, right? And the outrage, the moral outrage about having these candid conversations, these types of conversations happen all the time, Okay, people talk this way. Lawyers talk this way in settlement conferences. Sometimes it includes colorful language. Sometimes it includes, sort of pushy language because you're trying to settle very complicated claims. Okay, these people are not friends. They're not going to be playing cards after this whole thing is over. They're both trying to get what they want. Donald Trump wants to win the election. So he's got to talk about that, right? He's got to talk about finding 11,000 votes. Is that criminal? I don't think so. And it's within the confines, it's within the context of a settlement. I think we're going to see some more of that here in the upcoming slides. But the point here, everybody, in my opinion, I think is going a little bit crazy with some of the policing of speech. Everybody gets offended by tough language, by colorful language. This is scary language, right? It's concerning. But immediately the response always is to just lock people up for this stuff. Okay, and I've been very critical about the people who want to lock people up for speech a long time on this program. Last week we talked about a cop here in Arizona who said, I'm going to go shoot the mayor if she defunds the police, a police officer in Arizona. People are saying, well, he should be locked up and thrown, lock him up. It's like, guys, people use colorful language all the time. People want to settle things. These conversations are supposed to be open. They're supposed to be candid. I don't like it. I don't think it was well advised. I think it's politically a mistake. I think Trump got some bad legal advice. I would not have walked him in there that way and just said, here's a laundry list of things to talk about. Talk about whatever the hell you want. Now, I've also never worked with President Trump, so I can't tell you what that attorney-client relationship is working or how that works. Probably not easy, right? Probably a pretty difficult client to work with, but this is a settlement conference and you're supposed to talk about these types of issues. And so if Brad and the Georgia people, if this type of conversation scares them, if they're concerned about people in government pushing the boundaries a little bit, then they're probably in the wrong field. So in my mind, what happened here is everybody knows that this is how business is done. They all talk this way, but it's the day before an election and they know that this type of headline is going to be very damaging for Trump and Republicans. And so it's exactly what happened. Kind of a setup. They got the language that they wanted out of him. They did a settlement conference with no intention at all of settling anything. And then they just turned around immediately. This call happened on Saturday. Boom. Call leaked over to the Washington Post. They published it. We have an election tomorrow. So, it's not the best language. I wouldn't ever encourage anybody to sort of talk that way, but it is a settlement conference and we give people more leeway in that manner, right? Trump had both of his attorneys on, maybe three of them. I don't know who Alex is, but another third attorney. And then we also have Brad Raffensperger with his attorney on, the Office of General Counsel. Okay, they're all adults in there. They're all big boys and girls. They can handle this type of language. I'm so tired of this scary language. Everybody's so scared of everything everybody says. You can't even have a conversation in a settlement agreement anymore, in a settlement conference anymore. It's ridiculous. Let's go back to the transcript. It says Raffensperger, well, Mr. President, the challenge that you have is the data you have is wrong. We talked to congressmen and they were surprised. So this is Brad going back to President Trump. But I guess there was a person named Mr. Brainard who came to these meetings and presented data. And he said that there was dead people. I believe it was upward of 5,000. The actual number were two people that were dead that voted. So that's wrong. So you can see that just from his sort of language there, right? He's frustrated. He's kind of pissed off at the president. There were two people that were dead voted. He's angry. And you can understand why. Now, we've been following Matt Brainard for some time on this channel. And in my opinion, he's done some of the most credible work on calculating some of these lists of voters. Remember what Matt Brainard was doing is he would identify buckets of voters in different categories. He'd say, okay, these people are dead and they cast a ballot. These people moved, and he would compare the national change of address form with the voter registration rolls, and he would see who moved but who still cast a vote. And he put together a call center, generated a ton of money. I mean, he put together a massive operation very quickly, and it was very impressive. So I've been following him for some time. Raffensperger said that claims that there were 5,000 dead voters. Well, Matt Brainard didn't say that at all. Do you know why I know? Because we watched his video where he said, no, we didn't identify any dead people voting. He responded on Twitter. He said, hey, dumbass, Georgia Secretary of State, I never made any such allegation. Get your facts straight and do your job. I handed you via FedEx thousands of illegitimate voters. I have never made any accusation, anything like this ever. In fact, very early on, I specifically said we did not find this. This clown needs to resign. Right? So there's Raffensperger coming out and saying, your evidence, your data is wrong. And meanwhile, he's citing bad data. Okay, Trump is citing data that he thinks is bad. He's citing data that Matt Brainard thinks is bad. So everybody's got bad data. Everybody's got bad information. This whole thing is just turned into this political, mess, and they're trying to sort their way through it, which is the purpose of what a settlement conference is for. That's why you do these things. And so Hilbert goes back and says, Mr. President and Cleta, this is Kurt Hilbert. If I might interject for a moment, Ryan, I would like to suggest that 4 categories that have already been mentioned by the president that have actual hard numbers, 24,149 votes were counted illegally. So Hilbert is on Team Trump. He says that in and of itself is sufficient to change the results or place the outcome in doubt. We would like to sit down with your office, and we can do it through purposes of compromise, or just like this phone call, just to deal with that limited category of votes. And just like this phone call, right? We can do it through the purposes of compromise, and just like this phone call, just to deal with that limited category of votes. And if you are able to establish that our numbers are not accurate, then fine. However, we believe they are accurate. We've now had 3 or 4 separate experts looking at these numbers. So once again, Hilbert on Team Trump is indicating compromise, settlement. Can we just talk about some of these minor issues, which happen to be pretty damn major? But they're going to limit the scope. They've identified 24,000. They don't need to talk about all of the other bullet points that Trump was rambling on about. They just focus on that one bucket. Trump chimes back in and he says, listen, certified accountants looked at them. Hilbert turns back and says, correct. And this is just based on the U.S. Postal Service data and your own Secretary of State data. So that's what we would entreat to, and we would ask you to sit down with us in a compromise and settlements proceeding and actually go through the registered voter IDs and the registrations. And if you can convince us that 24,149 is inaccurate, then fine. But we tend to believe that is, obviously more than 11,000. That's sufficient to change the results entirely in and of itself. So what would you say to that, Mr. Germany? Germany, Team Raffensperger says, I'm happy to get with our lawyers and we'll set that up. That number is not accurate. And I think we can show you for all the ones we've looked at why it's not. So if that would be helpful, I'm happy to get with our lawyers and set that up with you guys. Trump says, well, let me ask you, Kurt, you think that is an accurate number? That was based on information given to you by the Secretary of State's department, right? Hilbert responds, that's correct. Hilbert says the information is the minimum, most conservative data based upon the USPS data and the Secretary of State's office that have been made publicly available. So Hilbert is referring to the U.S. Postal Service data and the Secretary of State data. He says, we do not have the internal numbers from the Secretary of State, yet we have asked for it 6 times. I sent a letter over several times requesting this information, and it's been rebuffed every single time. So it stands to reason that if the information is not forthcoming, there's something to hide. That's the problem we have. Okay. And it looks like, yep, so we got those slides. Meadows goes back. Okay, and he says, Mr. President, this is Mark. It sounds like we've got 2 different sides agreeing that we can look at those areas. And I assume that we can do it within the next 24 to 48 hours to go ahead and get that reconciled. So we can look at the 2 claims, making sure that we get access to the Secretary of State's data to either validate or invalidate the claims that have been made. Is that correct? So Mark Meadows, it goes back to this. He's the counsel. I'm sorry. He is the chief of staff for President Trump. He says, all right, so, okay, this is what it sounds like. Next 24 to 48 hours, we can get this thing resolved. We can get access to some of your data so we can invalidate or validate the claims. Is that correct? Did I catch that right? Germany says, no, that's not what I said. I'm happy to have our lawyers sit down with Kurt and the lawyers on that side and explain to him, hey, here's, based on what we've looked at so far, here's how we know this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. Meadows said, so what you're saying, Ryan, let me make sure. So what you're saying is you really don't want to give access to the data. You just want to make another case on why the lawsuit is wrong. Germany says, I don't think we can give access to data that's protected by the law. But we can sit down with them and say, Trump chimes in and says, but you're allowed to have a phony election? You're allowed to have a phony election, right? Germany says, no, sir. So this is where it's getting, it's getting a little bit combative, right? Trump is just sort of really angry that they're not giving him what he wants. They want access to the data. Meadows says that. Hilbert says that. Germany says no. Team Raffensperger says no. This is how the call wraps up. He says, Trump goes on. You see another paragraph here? That's from Trump. He says, that's the way it is. I would like you, for the attorneys, I'd like you to perhaps meet with Ryan. That's Team Raffensperger. Ideally tomorrow, because I think you should come to a resolution of this before the election. Otherwise, you're going to have people just not voting. They don't want to vote. They hate the state. They hate the governor. They hate the Secretary of State. I will tell you right now, the only people that like you are the people that will never vote for you. You know that, right, Brad? They like you, they like you. They can't believe what they found. They want more people like you. So look, can you get together tomorrow? And Brad, we just want the truth. It's simple. And everyone is going to look very good if the truth comes out. It's okay. It takes a little while, but let the truth come out. And the real truth is I won by 400,000 votes. At least that's the real truth, but we don't need 400,000 votes. Oh, I'm sorry. But we don't need 400,000 votes. We need less than 2,000. And you guys are going to be able to meet tomorrow, Ryan. Germany says, I'll get with Chris, the lawyer who's representing us in the case, and see what he can get together with Kurt. I'll get with Chris. Raffensperger says, yeah, Ryan will be in touch with the other attorneys on the call, Mr. Meadows. Thank you, Mr. President Trump, for your time. Trump says, bye, thanks. That's the end of the call. So that's kind of condensing it all into 45 minutes. You could have listened to the whole thing at this point in time, right? I've been going on for 45 minutes. But this is what it was. And I don't think it was effective for the president's campaign. I don't think that it matters. If you are on the side that thinks that President Trump is sort of playing, 3D chess and that he's sort of laying the framework for impeaching these guys, we'll see what comes of that. But largely, I thought that the president's performance was, similar to somebody who was just very angry at the situation. Not particularly effective. I'm not sure why they went into that settlement conference. I don't think that there was any meaningful hope that Team Raffensperger and the Georgia election people are going to do anything that the president wants at this point. So why did they go into that settlement conference? Was there another reason? Is there another shoe that's going to drop? Do they have more evidence that they're going to present on January 6th? Well, let's talk about January 6th, because that's when the votes are going to be counted. So right now, Team Trump and all of his attorneys and a number of senators are saying that they are going to be objecting to the counting of the electoral votes on Wednesday. As a reminder, the way this works, the state votes. They certify the votes, they count the votes, they send them into Congress. On January 6th, that's when there's a joint session of Congress. President Pence, or Vice President Pence, is the president of the Senate. And after those certificates of ascertainment are sent into Congress, he's the one who opens them up. He counts them. And then he doesn't count them. He gives them to a teller. The teller gives them back to him. He announces who the next president is. And there's a way that whole process can be screwed up. And that's if the House and the Senate objects to the votes. One House representative, one senator. Last week, we learned that Josh Hawley would be the first senator of the Republican side who's going to be objecting to the votes. The way that works is if you have one side or one person from each house objecting to the votes, then the houses will break off into individual sessions. They'll have floor votes. If they agree to throw out one state's votes, those votes don't count. Kind of the only path left for Trump to secure victory here. If Joe Biden, if enough of his electoral votes are disqualified, if they're voted out by both houses of Congress and he drops under 270 electoral votes, what happens? A contingent election. Each state gets one vote. Donald Trump secures a second term if each state votes and gets one vote, because Trump has more states. So the question has been, what are these Congress people going to do? If they all object in the Senate, Trump can win the Senate, but the Republicans don't control the House. The Democrats do. So let's take a look and see if we can figure any of this out. We had a lot of activity over this past long weekend. On January 2nd, we learned that a joint statement came out from a number of different senators. Senator Cruz, Johnson, Lankford, Daines, Kennedy, Blackburn, Braun, Senators-elect Loomis, Marshall, Hagerty, and Tuberville There's Tuberville. We were wondering what he was going to do. So we've got Texas, we got Wisconsin on there, Oklahoma, Montana, Louisiana. We have Tennessee, Indiana, Wyoming, Kansas, Tennessee, and Alabama. And here is the statement. It says, America is a republic whose leaders are chosen with democratic elections. Those elections, in turn, must comply with the Constitution and with federal and state law. When the voters fairly decide an election pursuant to the rule of law, the losing candidate should acknowledge and respect the legitimacy of that election. And if the voters choose to elect a new office holder, our nation should have a peaceful transfer of power. The election of 2020, like 2016, was hard fought and in many swing states narrowly decided. The 2020 election, however, featured unprecedented allegations of voter fraud, violations, and lax enforcement of election law, and other voting irregularities. Voter fraud has posed a persistent challenge in our elections, although its breadth and scope are disputed. By any measures, the allegations of fraud and irregularities in the 2020 election exceed any in our lifetimes. And so, before I keep going on this, let's just sort of flesh out where this is going to land in the bucket of votes. Okay, as we talked about this at the beginning of the program, if you missed that, we're saying that there are sort of a couple different sides to this thing. You're going to have the Republicans who are not going to object. They're going to say, nope, I'm not going to overturn the will of the people. The American citizens voted. Not going to disturb that. That's one category. We have another category of people who say they are not going to object to the or they're not going to object when the votes are being counted, but they're not really saying how they're going to vote on the floor. Okay, so let's break this up again. When an objection takes place, one House member, one senator, we get the pair. That triggers both houses to go and have their own floor votes. So we know that a number of senators are not going to be objecting at stage one. But if somebody else does, so let's say we have Josh Hawley from, where is he from? Missouri, and we have Mo Brooks from the House, and they combine, they object to, let's say, Pennsylvania's votes. What happens then? Are the same senators who said that they're not going to object, well, now Pennsylvania's votes are going to go to floor votes in the Senate. So is there a statement that they're not going to object at stage one? Does that apply and carry over into stage two for the floor votes? We don't know yet, right? So there's some other senators who say, I'm not going to object to the votes, but does that mean that they're not going to join the Republicans in stage two? And remember, there hasn't been any evidence presented yet. President Trump is going to say that there's more evidence coming. So they haven't heard anything yet. So we've got the guys and gals who are saying, we're not going to be objecting to anything at all. So you'd presume that they're not objecting to the initial objection, or they're not objecting at all, and they're also going to vote in favor of upholding the votes on the floor. Then you have another group who say, well, we're not going to object to the votes, but we don't know how they're going to vote on the floor. Then we have others who just say, we're going to object across the board. So let's see where this one falls in. It says the election of 2020, we already read that one. Voter fraud has posed a persistent challenge in our elections, although its breadth and scope are disputed. By any measure, the allegations of fraud exceed any in our lifetimes. So, not really a clear statement there that there was fraud in this election. Just says by any measure, the allegations of fraud and the irregularities exceed any in our lifetimes. So some very careful language there. And those allegations are not believed by just one individual candidate. Instead, they are widespread. Reuters Ipsos polling tragically shows that 39% of Americans believe the election was rigged. That's in quotes. The belief is held by Republicans 67%, Democrats 17%, and independents 31%. And that's been our point here on this channel, right? A huge swath of America, whether you believe it or not. The polls show, there's a lot of data that shows, I think a lot of the the House representatives who have decided to join in objecting these votes, they're probably hearing earfuls from their constituents, right? And you're seeing hundreds or allegedly maybe 100 plus House representatives who are wanting to object to this stuff now. So there is a groundswell of people who believe that this stuff was fraudulent. I think the biggest mistake that the Democrats have made thus far is just by ignoring all of those claims, by just saying, yeah, you're all idiots and conspiracy theorists, and sit down, shut up, don't even talk about this stuff, right? We saw YouTube clamp down on this. Twitter's sort of censoring stuff. Facebook's censoring stuff. Everybody on CNN and across the board are just really in overdrive with the marketing on how bad anybody is who even asks questions about it, right? Now you're hearing words sedition, treason, coup, working overtime, but still, 39% of Americans believe it was rigged, according to this letter. Some members of Congress disagree with that assessment, as do many members of the media. But whether or not our elected officials or journalists believe it, the deep distrust of our democratic process will not magically disappear. It should concern us all, and it poses an ongoing threat to the legitimacy of any subsequent administrations. Exact same point I've been making for about 2 months. Ideally, the courts have heard evidence and resolved these claims of serious election fraud. Twice the Supreme Court had the opportunity to do so. Twice the court declined. And I think that's being generous. I think it's more times than that. Even before the election, I was very disappointed that the Supreme Court didn't chime in on the Pennsylvania case, the DNC versus Bukvar. They could have decided that, settled that. We would have known a lot more about what they think of how these elections are being run. They failed to do it, I would say, at least 3 times. The Supreme Court has been missing in action. They're responsible for this as much as anybody. They could have easily helped clear some of this stuff up. They didn't do it. On January 6th, Cruz says it is incumbent on Congress to vote on whether to certify the 2020 election results. That vote is the lone constitutional power remaining to consider and force the resolution of the multiple allegations of serious voter fraud. The lone constitutional power remaining, because the Supreme Court has bailed out. He says, at the quadrennial joint session, there is a long precedent of Democratic members of Congress raising objections to the presidential election results, as they did in 69, 2001, 2005, 2017, and in 1969 and 2005. A Democratic senator joined with a Democratic House member in forcing votes in both houses on whether to accept the presidential electors being challenged. There you go. Okay, this has happened twice before. We had a senator and a House member from both the Democratic parties objecting. The article continues. It says the most direct precedent on this question arose in 1877 following serious allegations of fraud and illegal conduct in the Hayes-Tilden presidential race, specifically the election in 3 states, Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina, were alleged to have been conducted illegally. And in 1877, Congress did not ignore those allegations, nor did the media simply dismiss those and say that they were radicals trying to undermine democracy. Congress appointed an electoral commission consisting of 5 senators, 5 House members, 5 Supreme Court justices to consider and resolve the disputed returns, right? So you're going to be hearing for a long period of time, all day for the rest of the day, all day tomorrow, probably all day Wednesday. You're going to be seeing that language: coup, sedition, radicals, conspiracy theorists, undermining democracy, all of that. But in this letter, we just learned, as we've been talking about here, right, there's some precedent for this stuff. We even played Maxine Waters doing the same thing. The letter goes on and says we should follow that precedent. To wit, Congress should immediately appoint an electoral commission with full investigatory and fact-finding authority to conduct an emergency 10-day audit of the election returns in the disputed states. Once completed, individual states would reevaluate the commission's findings and could convene a special legislative session to decertify a change in their vote if needed. Accordingly, we intend to vote on January 6th to reject the electors from disputed states as not regularly given and lawfully certified unless and until the emergency 10-day audit is completed. We are not naive. We fully expect most, if not all, Democrats, and perhaps more than a few Republicans to vote otherwise. But support of the election integrity should not be a partisan issue. A fair and credible audit conducted expeditiously and completed well before January 20 would dramatically improve Americans' faith in our electoral process and would significantly enhance the legitimacy of whoever becomes our next president. We owe that to the people. These are matters worthy of the Congress and entrusted to us to defend. We do not take this action lightly. We are not acting to thwart the democratic process, but rather to protect it. And every one of us should act together to ensure that the election was lawfully conducted under the Constitution and do everything we can to restore faith in our democracy. So a number of senators are going to be taking that. Now, if we put them in our buckets, sounds like they're going to be objecting to everything, right? They're far on the bucket side where they're going to be objecting to all of the contested states. Don't know what those look like yet. And when those states are taken apart for a floor vote, they're going to vote against accepting those states. Now, it's not that many senators. Right? They need a majority, so they have to get 50 plus 1 in order to ultimately throw those votes out in the Senate, and the same story needs to happen in the House. So it's a long shot, right? It's a big hurdle to get through because the Democrats control the House, and we're going to hear in a minute that even some Republican senators are not willing to join in on the Cruz momentum that he's trying to build up here. But they haven't been very clear what bucket they're in. Are they in the we're going to vote to certify, we're going to vote no on your attempt to throw out those votes, Or are they just saying they're not going to object, but they might be open to throwing out the votes on a floor vote? It's going to be tricky, folks. Let's listen to what Jake Tapper has to say about it. He's not particularly happy about this. Here is Jake Tapper. Again, listen for all the buzz language. You're going to be hearing a lot of this over these next few days. Sedition and all that stuff. Here he is.
The state of our union is facing a perilous start to 2021. What are the president and a big chunk of congressional Republicans focused on? Undermining the results of the election. Essentially a bloodless coup, leading the Republican Party to a state of turmoil. Saturday, 11 Republican senators said they would vote against counting electoral votes in Congress next week, calling for a, quote, emergency 10-day audit of election returns, despite there being, pardon me, despite there being no evidence of widespread voter fraud. The group is following the lead of Senator Josh Hawley, who says he will formally object to Biden's decisive win, despite zero credible evidence that would justify such a move. Zero. Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska slammed Hawley and other members of the Sedition Caucus, saying, quote, adults don't point a loaded gun at the heart of legitimate self-government. Late Saturday, Senator Mitt Romney said in a blistering statement, quote, I could never have imagined seeing these things in the greatest democracy in the world. Has ambition so eclipsed principle? I want to note that we invited each of the 12 senators involved in plotting this disgraceful effort to come on the show this morning to try to defend and explain their position. Each of them declined or failed to respond. It all recalls what Ulysses S. Grant once wrote in 1861, quote, there are but two parties now, traitors and patriots.
Traitors? Oh my goodness, these are elected senators. Traitors? Wow. So that must mean that the Democrats are the patriots. They're the ones out there really in love with America and saving America. Okay, so he says that there was zero evidence at all. So zero. So apparently what we've been talking about for 2 months with, 1,000 slides, 20, 25 different lawsuits we've analyzed, zero evidence, nothing. And everybody else who even thinks about it is seditious. They're traitorous. They're executing a bloodless coup, according to Jake Tapper, which is weird because I thought that if you were sort of operating within the law of the country and you were just following those rules, how can you be a traitor to your country's own rules? I don't know. It doesn't make much sense to me. Let's see if we can find any hints in U.S. Code Section 15 in Title 3 says that counting electoral votes in Congress. Okay, this was passed on June 25th, 1948 and is executed into the United States Code. It says, interesting, upon such reading of any such certificate or paper, the President of the Senate shall call for objections, if any. Every objection shall be made in writing and shall state clearly and concisely and without argument the ground thereof, and shall be signed by at least one senator, one member of the House of Representatives before the same shall be received. All right, so that's what Ted Cruz and Mo Brooks are talking about doing. So they're sort of operating within the confines of that rule. When all objections so made to any vote or paper from a state shall have been received and read, the Senate shall thereupon withdraw. So they'll go into their separate chambers, and such objections shall be submitted to the Senate for its decision. Same thing shall happen in the House, and no electoral votes or votes from any state which shall have been regularly given by electors whose appointment has been lawfully certified according to Section 6 of this title, from which but one return has been received, shall be rejected, but the two houses concurrently may reject the vote or votes when they agree that such votes or vote have not been so regularly given by electors whose appointment has been so certified. Okay, so they're just following the rules on that. Now, Jake Tapper, a lot of the people on the left, a lot of the Democrats, anybody who says this stuff is ridiculous, they are a little bit loose with a lot of the language, okay? They don't really like to follow the laws and the rules. We've already talked about this. For example, the Democrat Supreme Court out of the state of Pennsylvania, they looked at the legislature that enacted rules for how their elections should run, and they just decided, well, we don't like those rules, so we're just going to change them because we're the Supreme Court and we have the power to do that. So when you have a rule, my perspective is follow the rule. If you don't like the rule, change the rule, change the laws. If they don't like Section 15 of the U.S. Code, well, they're the Congress people. They're the Democrats. They may very well get the White House and the Senate and the House. Maybe they should update the U.S. Code right? Maybe they should make a movement, and if they don't like it so much, change the rule. But they don't just get to tell everybody that these people in 1948 who modified the law, the people of the 1940s, they passed this and they modified it. They put it into the rules. Why did they do that? Maybe because it had some meaning. It has a reason why it's there. It's supposed to be used when the federal government can't trust the various states for running their own elections. There's a reason for it. It's written for a reason. It should be followed. Now, when they start using language like sedition and traitorous and a coup attempt, that's just a loose, it's a really, I think, shameful way to use language. To just accuse, I mean, what they're doing is accusing their political enemies of treason, even though their political opponents are following the rules. Now, Republicans got to brace themselves. This is going to come back again 4 years from now when it's Kamala Harris up there counting the votes for the next Republican president. The Democrats are going to use this to full effect. So the Republicans better brace themselves for it. But this is politics. Okay. You are allowed to do this stuff. It's not sedition. It's not treason. It's not traitorous. They're following the rules. It's in the U.S. code. They're literally following it by the book. If the other Republican senators or House members, if they don't want to execute that rule, it's fine. It's their prerogative. They don't have to do it. But to call your political opponent a traitor or claiming that they're executing a bloodless coup for just simply following the rules is bananas. It's the rules. If you don't like the rules, change the rules. But you don't get to modify the language to fit just because you feel like this hasn't happened before or like you think that the evidence isn't sufficient. You don't get the opportunity to just, well, everybody's a traitor. Well, you're a traitor then. Oh, you don't like Joe Biden? You're a traitor. You're a seditious. You're executing a coup. It's nonsense. But you're going to hear a lot more of it. Here is Ted Cruz on video making a good point. If this stuff was so meaningless, if Section 15 of the U.S. Code has no effect, well, why the hell is it in there? Why don't we just give this stuff to a clerk and let them just decide who the next president's going to be? It's because it matters. Because when Congress in 1948 passed the rules, we have to presume that they thought about it and they wrote the rules and they wrote the law with meaning. They had an intention behind it. We don't get to fast forward 50, 70 years into the future and just say, well, they didn't really mean that, though. I mean, yeah, you can object. Yeah, you can break into your separate houses. We got formal rules and requirements explaining how that works, but they didn't really mean that, you guys. I mean, come on. They just want you to go in and vote. You don't really get to object. It's asinine. Here is Ted Cruz.
You are an expert on the Constitution. You are a constitutionalist. You wrote an entire book about it. What does the Constitution tell us about who decides who the president should be? What if the commission that you are explaining does form, comes back with actual evidence of fraud? Then what happens?
Well, then the results have to be set aside. If there's evidence of fraud and it's substantial and significant enough to affect the results in a particular state, then those election results would have to be set aside. And the states would then have to determine, all right, we have a valid claim here. The evidence supports it. We need to conduct elections consistent with the law. You know, the Constitution gives the responsibility of counting the ballots to the Vice President of the United States, Vice President Mike Pence, and to both houses of Congress. And the framers of the Constitution, when they assigned a task to the Congress, they knew what they were doing. You know, there's some folks who are saying this is purely a ministerial act. They just have to, count them and walk out and you have no judgment whatsoever. Well, that frankly doesn't make any sense. Why would the framers give to Congress something that could be given to a clerk? The reason they gave it to Congress is they understood there are difficult determinations about what counts as a valid vote. You know, following the 1876 election, 10 years later, in 1887, Congress passed a statute, the statute that we're operating under. It's called the Electoral Count Act. And what it provides is the mechanism for raising an objection. And it says you can raise an objection if the votes were not regularly made by lawfully certified electors. And so in this instance, if you have states that are violating the law, that are committing fraud, those votes are not being regularly made, and those are not lawfully certified electors. And so that Congress's responsibility is to address these claims. I understand that for some of my colleagues, that's a hard choice. It's not a responsibility they
Yeah, they don't welcome it. I don't know why that cut off there, but they don't welcome it, right? They don't want to make any hard decisions. They just want to go into Congress, be there for 47 years, run for higher office, maybe get elected president because there's nobody else. And that's their career. Right now, what is being asked is the American people from various states are saying, what happened in your state is garbage. We're not happy with the electoral results. We want you to object to it. Okay, it's a democratic republic operating, and the Congress and the Constitution provides a mechanism for that release valve. It gives the states and their representatives in the form of senators and House members to go in and object to the votes when they don't think that what their executive did or what their state legislature did or what the courts in their states did was legitimate. It's there for a reason. And when you start to water down the laws, I have a huge problem with how, this is sort of an interpretive philosophy in jurisprudence that exists around the country, that the laws are sort of suggestions. Okay, we have this debate every time that we have a new SCOTUS nominee. Amy Coney Barrett, she's an originalist. She says, look, I'm going to read the law and do what the law says. But the other wing of the court, sort of the active liberty crowd, says, well, the rules, the Constitution, these things, they're nice, but what we want to do is create liberty. We want to create justice and equality and all those things. So the rules are kind of just a guidepost. Well, that's how you have to have fights over what does the right to keep and bear arms mean? What does that mean? An originalist might say that, well, it says pretty clearly, I can keep and bear arms, right? It's pretty obvious. The other side, well, that language, they want to water that down. It's not that important. It's just a suggestion. We need to modify these things to make them more current. Right? This was passed in 1887. Well, back then, they didn't have what we have now, so that rule doesn't count. So we're just going to count the electoral votes however we want. Freedom of speech. The First Amendment, kind of just a suggestion. It's nice. We all like free speech. But that's not really what the founders meant. They just said, they said that, free speech back then in the 1700s, they were talking about, the king in England and all this stuff. Today, though, we got to be sensitive and use proper pronouns and, be very, very delicate with our speech. And so we have to modify the First Amendment to comport with 2021. We got to update it to bring it close to our times. And the answer is no on that. Okay, the answer is no. We do what the law says. In this case, the law says 1887, the Electoral Count Act, it gives us some pretty clear guidelines. We can't just presume that all of that is meaningless because it doesn't help you with your current electoral problem. Okay, follow the rules. Don't like the rules? Change the rules. But the rules are what they are. Now, that being said, we have some other senators who are not going to be joining in. And this comes from Tom Cotton, who is a Republican from Arkansas. So we just heard from 10 Cruz and I think 11 total senators who are going to be objecting. Let's listen to see what Tom Cruise has to say. I'm sorry, Tom Cotton has to say. Tom Cruise is not in the Senate, though maybe he should be. Congress itself is like Mission Impossible, so maybe he can get something done in there. All right, Tom Cotton here on his statement for the joint session of Congress. He says, releasing this statement, I share the concerns of many Arkansans. How do you say that word? I know how to say Arkansas. I don't know how to say Arkansans about irregularities in the presidential election, especially in states that rush through election law changes, which has been my point, to relax standards for voting by mail. I also share their disappointment in the results. I support a commission. Oh, there it is. I support a commission to study the last election and propose reforms. So there's a different bucket. All right, we've got the bucket of people who are going to object on the counting and on the floor. We have those who are not going to object on the counting, but may object on the floor. We have the others who are just not going to object to anything. And then we have the commission. The commission. We're just asking questions. It's sort of split in the middle. I'm not going to take a hard decision. That's what anybody who doesn't ever want to make a decision about anything. They just say, it's a great question. I'm going to appoint a commission and we're going to put a bunch of people on there and they're going to figure this stuff out so I don't have to do any of the hard thinking. There we go. So Tom Cotton says we're going to have a commission after the Republicans win in Georgia. The Senate should also hold more hearings on the matter. There you go. Commissions, hearings. All Americans deserve to have confidence in their elections. Nevertheless, the founders entrusted our elections chiefly to the states, not Congress. They entrusted the election to our president of the president of the people, acting through the Electoral College, not Congress. They entrusted the adjudication to courts, not Congress. Under the Constitution and federal law, Congress's power is limited to counting electoral votes submitted by the states, which is very interesting given the fact that we just showed you what the U.S. Code in Section 15 had to say. Congress can be a little bit more involved in it. They're not just there counting. If that is all that they were doing, Why do we have the Electoral Count Act? Why do we have any of those statutes? If that's all they're doing, the state should just send him in to some high school kid and he can just tally up the votes, right? That's all it is. And that was Ted Cruz's point. If Congress purported to overturn the results of the Electoral College, it would not only exceed that power, but also establish unwise precedents. First, Congress would take away the power to choose the president from the people. Second, Congress would imperil the Electoral College. And third, Congress would take another big step towards federalizing election law, which, by the way, those are all pretty good points, right? Those are all good points. Like, this stuff has consequences, and you're going to see a lot of the people, upset if something like this were to happen. He says, thus, I will not oppose the counting of certified electoral votes on January 6th. Let's dive into that a little bit further. Thus, I will not oppose the counting of certified electoral votes on January 6th. All right. So that sounds to me like he's in the I'm not going to oppose anything bucket. That's Tom Cotton, senator from Arkansas. We're going to fly through some of these. There's a lot of text on this. In the House, we have the representatives. Ken Buck leads a group of House members in a statement respecting the state's authority to select its own electors. So we just heard we've got sort of three categories. Ted Cruz, object to everything. We've got Tom Cotton, object to nothing. We've got Rep. Mo Brooks in the House, who is objecting to everything. And then we have this guy, Rep. Ken Buck, objecting to nothing. So we're seeing both sides. The Republican Party is sort of splitting in two. He says, like most Americans, we're outraged at the significant abuses in our election system resulting from the reckless adoption of mail-in ballots. Well, this is your time to do something about that, Representative. And he says the lack of safeguards to guarantee that only legitimate votes are cast. It is shameful that between both chambers of Congress, we have held precisely one hearing since Election Day. Okay, the people cannot trust a system that refuses to guarantee that only legal votes are cast to select its leaders. Only the states, however, have the authority to appoint electors in accordance with state law. Congress has a narrow role in the presidential election process. Its job is to count the electors by the states, not to determine which electors the states should have sent. And he's going through the Constitution. He says the U.S. Constitution, the 12th Amendment in particular, is clear. With respect to presidential elections, there's no authority for Congress to make value judgments in the abstract regarding any state's election laws or the manner in which they have been implemented. Did he read the same Constitution that I just read to you? Or the same laws? Okay, he's not even referencing the Electoral Count Act. He's referencing the Constitution and the 12th Amendment. Nor does Congress have discretion to disqualify electors based on its own finding that fraud occurred in the state's election. Yeah, I mean, these guys, what the hell did I just read? Am I living in bizarro world? What is he talking about? As of this moment, not a single state has submitted multiple conflicting slates of electoral votes. In other words, the state has been sent, Biden. So he's talking, so he's talking about, yeah. The text of the Constitution is clear. States select electors. Congress does not. Accordingly, our path forward is also clear. We must respect the state's authority here. Yeah. All right. So bizarre, right? He's a member of Congress saying that Congress has no power, even though Section 15, which I literally just read you, has details about how the objections work. He thinks it doesn't matter. It's a political calculation. Let you be the ones to decide on that issue. So now that we sort of have an understanding on what's going to be happening, let's take a look at the rules. So we have the Senate that is now set or sort of dividing. We see this sort of splitting of the sea, and we've got the Republicans who are going to be objecting, the ones who are not going to be objecting. Same story going on in the House. Over this weekend, yesterday, we learned that there is a new resolution that was put in place by Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi. It's called Senate Concurrent Resolution Number 1, a concurrent resolution to provide for the counting on January 6, 2021 of the electoral votes for president and vice president. The motion to reconsider is agreed to without objection. It's agreed to in the Senate, agreed to in the House, and this is how they're going to be counting the votes on Wednesday. This is the rule. We have one paragraph about it. So let's spend a little time on it. We'll probably revisit it tomorrow and probably again on Wednesday. So just keep this in mind. But the question was, how are they going to be ultimately counting the votes? We know what the Electoral Count Act says. We know what the 12th Amendment says. We know what the Constitution says. but what are the internal rules? What are the procedures that they're going to be adopting? So this says here, resolved by the Senate. This is a concurrent resolution. Resolved by the Senate, the House of Representatives concurring, the two houses of Congress, they shall meet in the hall of the House of Representatives on Wednesday at 1 o'clock, post-meridian, pursuant to the requirements of the Constitution and laws relating to the election of the President and the Vice President. The President of the Senate shall be the presiding officer. We all know that. The two tellers shall be previously appointed by the President of the Senate on the part of the Senate, and two by the Speaker on the part of the House of Representatives, to whom shall be handed, as they are opened by the President of the Senate, all of the certificates and papers purporting to be certificates of the electoral votes. Okay, so let's back up a little bit on that. Two tellers, right? We've got two tellers. We've talked about this. The House of Representatives appoints two individuals. So that's Pelosi and her two people. We've got the Senate, who's going to be Mike Pence, his two people. Mike Pence is going to be opening up the votes. They are opened by the President of the Senate. All certificates and papers purporting to be certificates of the electoral votes, which certificates and papers shall be opened, presented, and acted upon in the alphabetical order of the states, beginning with the letter A. So that means, my friends, big Arizona might be the first contested state. Feels good. Feels good to be an Arizona boy. Finally get some national prominence here. So what are we going to have? We'll have Alaska, or maybe Alabama first, then Alaska. Then we're up. So we're going to see if anybody objects to us first. We got a while until Pennsylvania comes up. Wisconsin's not going to be for a while. Michigan's up there. Florida's pretty close. But Arizona, our big debut, let's see what happens. So they're going to start with A, and said tellers will have then read the same in the presence and the hearing of the two houses. They shall make a list of the votes as they shall appear from said certificates, and the votes having been ascertained and counted in the manner and according to the rules by law provided, the result of the same shall be delivered to the President of the Senate, who shall thereupon announce the state of the vote, which announcement shall be deemed sufficient declaration of the persons, if any, elected President and Vice President, and together with a list of the votes be entered onto the journals of the two houses. This passed the Senate yesterday. Okay, this final little provision here, that is when the President is official. Okay, what YouTube said on December 8th or December 14th is not the official rule. It's when the votes are counted and they are deemed to be sufficient that the President of the Senate makes the announcement, which is then entered into the journals. That's it. Okay, so I expect that to be Joe Biden, but it's not official until it's official. And that's the rules, right? So many people are saying, well, gosh, there's a lot surrounding Mike Pence. Just said here, all the certificates and papers purporting to be certificates of the electoral votes, he's going to open those. Which ones are he, what's he going to open? I don't think it's going to be anything too exciting, but could be. What does Donald Trump say about all this stuff? So he posted this on New Year's Day. Big amounts of evidence will be presented on the 6th. We won big, is what he said. So that's the next question. Okay, we know what the order is that the states are going to be counted. We know at least some of how the House members are going to vote, some of how the Senate members are going to vote. But what's going to happen on the 6th? Donald Trump says there's going to be massive amounts of evidence. We will see. Now, the next final question, well, no, we've got a lot more to get to. The next question is, what about the vice president? Okay, Mike Pence, last week we talked a lot about Louis Gohmert suing the vice president in order to sort of reinvest in him the power to object to the votes, or I'm sorry, to count the differing slates of electoral votes. So remember, in many states, in Arizona, Nevada, some other places, when the electoral vote, or when the electoral college was meeting to cast their votes, they fill out certificates of ascertainment. What was happening is the Biden people would meet, but the Republican people would also meet, and they would cast their own certificates of ascertainment for their electors, for Donald Trump. And so what happens when Mike Pence gets two competing electoral votes, one from the GOP, one from the DNC? What do? So Louis Gohmert sued him. That lawsuit got dismissed. I think it went up to the 11th Circuit. They also dismissed it. I think Mike Pence himself doesn't even want that power, right? I think his attorneys responded and said, no, we're not interested in that. Mike Pence is not the guy who's going to get up there and just say, we're throwing out every single one of these Biden votes. Trump wins in a 50-state landslide, right? That's ridiculous. And we don't want that. The last time we covered that lawsuit, we thought that's kind of a ridiculous conclusion, because whoever is the vice president of the Senate is the most powerful person in the country. It's ultimately up to them. They get to pick who the president is. And we don't want an unconscionable type of outcome like that. So we did that analysis. That lawsuit, I think, is largely gone. But but the next question is, well, what is Mike Pence going to do? What is his position on this? We know what the Senate says. We know what the House says, what Ted Cruz says, what Ben Sass says, and so on. But what about Mike Pence? Right? He's kind of an important guy here. Well, we learned over the holiday break that on January 2nd, according to Jonathan Swan, the VP Chief of Staff, Mark Short, for the Vice President, said that Vice President Pence shares the concerns of millions of Americans about voter fraud and irregularities in the last election. The Vice President welcomes the efforts of members of the House and the Senate to use the authority they have under the law to raise objections and bring forward evidence before the Congress and the American people on January 6th. So Mike Pence, sort of in the middle there, right? We talked about objection, team objection, team no objection. Then we got the team in the middle who kind of is, kind of ambivalent about it. Take a look at Mike Pence's language closely. He shares the concerns. All right, well, does he think that there was voter fraud? Yes or no? Are you just sharing the concerns? Kind of important. He shares the concerns. So he's probably in that middle bucket of, well, I'm open to asking questions. Let's, investigate it a little bit further. Maybe a commission, maybe have a hearing, see what they find out, and then we can have some reasonable reforms. Here is Mike Pence. He was at a campaign rally. Georgia is happening tomorrow. He's out there campaigning in Georgia, and here is what he had to say yesterday.
I know we all got our doubts about the last election, and I want to assure you, I share the concerns of millions of Americans about voting irregularities. And I promise you, come this Wednesday, we'll have our day in Congress. We'll hear the objections. We'll hear the evidence. But tomorrow is Georgia's day.
Well, there you go. So he's going to hear the objections. He's going to hear the evidence, whatever that may be. And then this one was also getting some steam across Twitter today. People in the crowd are shouting, "Stop the steal," and 4 more years. And Mike Pence is just like, oh yeah. Let's listen to what he has to. Let's watch his head bob. Oh.
I leave here today.
So we're going to see what happens with Mike Pence. It's going to be a wild ride on Wednesday. I'm looking forward to it. I don't know about any of you. I think it's going to be very exciting. It is one of those things in our country where, this doesn't happen often. This is kind of a big deal. This is a changing tide one way or the other. No, I'm not so sure that it's necessarily a good thing either, right? We don't want our elections to have so many problems that we have to get to this point. The idea here is that this stuff gets resolved at lower levels. For example, if the Supreme Court would have told Pennsylvania how to properly run their elections, Pennsylvania could have run their elections in whatever way, they saw fit. The Supreme Court just didn't get involved in it with an empty court. Right. This isn't like the Supreme Court made a decision. They had an empty court. They were missing a seat. It was a 4-4 decision that went back down to Pennsylvania. We didn't even have a full court yet. So if Amy Coney Barrett was on there, that might have gone a different way. We would have had a better idea of what courts can do to modify the election rules that the legislature has set in stone. Can a court just go in and change the rules? Would have been good if the Supreme Court told us what Pennsylvania was allowed to do. They didn't. They refused to do it multiple times. So we don't know. Now the states have a mess across the board, and it has to bubble up into Congress. This is just our government in action, folks. And anytime that the federal government is sort of duking it out with itself, I'm okay with that. You know why? That means they're not passing 5,500 page, $2.4 trillion omnibus spending packages in, 2.5 hours, shoving that down the throats of the American people. So they want to bicker over some of this stuff. I'm okay with it. I'll be looking forward to it. I'll have a bucket of popcorn here. I suggest you do the same. Let's finish up the program with a little bit of bad popo. Let's start the year right with some bad popo. Bad police officers, misconduct involving police. This comes from our friends up north in Canada. Hello, my friends. This is a video that shows cops cracking down on, quote, illegal gathering of 6 people in Canada. A video that went viral Saturday shows police cracking down on a family's illegal New Year's Eve party in Gatineau, Quebec, leading to 2 arrests and 6 people fined. When cops arrived, they discovered 6 people from multiple households. Wow, whopping 6 people from multiple households. What is that, like 2 couples? You, your spouse, and 2 other couples? Kid and their who knows? All right. So violating Quebec's holiday COVID-19 restrictions that forbid private gatherings until January 10th, according to the National Post. Local lockdown rules, CBS News reported, prohibited visitors from other addresses from being inside people's homes. That's insane. That's going on in Canada. Matthew Tessier, the homeowner's brother and one of the 2 detained, told CBC News that the police used disproportionate force and weren't even wearing masks, which of course not, because it's not about that. Tessier admitted that the family took a risk with the gathering, but said he thought if the cops showed up, they would request him to politely disband the party. The worst case in my head was like a warning, but that is not what happened, is it? Here is the video. It's about 2 minutes long, I think. I'm not sure how much of this will play, but these are the cops just showing up on New Year's Eve because this looks like a bunch of rowdy hooligans. Here we go.
No, sir! No, sir! Fuck you! Fuck you! No, sir! Fuck you! Hey!
Il peut plus respirer, arrête! Arrête, il peut plus respirer!
Don't fucking do that! Don't fucking do that!
Okay, calm down.
Get fucking here!
Can we move? Okay?
Okay, we're calm. Don't do that! We're people!
Hey!
So that's what's going on up in Canada. We've got a bunch of officers not practicing any social distancing, really getting close to that guy's face. No masks on. They're coming in there. They're, spreading COVID and other germs and holiday misery everywhere they go. They say the police cannot do what they did to us. They treat us like animals, like criminals, Tessier said. In a separate interview with CTV News, Tessier said that he got involved in the confrontation after a cop allegedly grabbed his mother's arm. The truth is they aggressed us. Tessier's sister was also arrested for refusing to cooperate with requests to provide personal information. All Tessier and his sister have been released. All 6 attendees were fined $1,500, so that's $1,200 here in the U.S. And was it worth it, boys and girls? Bad popo, bad hombres and mujeres up there in Canada. Very, very, very interesting. But that's been going on around the country. Thanks, Canada, for letting us warm up the Bad Popo segment in 2021 with a story from your officers. Now, there's probably another side to the story, right? I haven't seen anything from the cops on what these people were doing. But the point of this is, why are they going around to these types of parties and literally arresting people who are in their homes? Is that the type of world we want to live in? I sure don't. All right, so let's transition on over to the super chats because it looks like we've got about a handful of them we got to get through. So our first one comes from multiple. Okay, so let's break into this one. We've got Matthew Riley who says, "Hey, Miss Faith, I can't find this anywhere, so I was wondering if you could help me. By law, I can run for the 2026 House of Representatives while I'm 24, as long as in Election Day I'm 25. Wait a minute. What order are these going? Do you have any advice on how I can defeat an establishment House member who has been there for 10 years? He has $2.2 million in fundraising. While I'm 24, as long as in Election Day I am 25. I looked in the code. It does not say anything about that. And I can't get a clear answer. Matthew Riley, I'm the same party as him, but he isn't really doing anything. I have 5 years to go, but don't know where to start." So Rep. Billy Long, Missouri District 7, it looks like. Okay. So a couple questions here. It's a meaty one, Matthew. Thank you for sending it. So yes, the Constitution requires that members of the House be at least 25 years old, 35 for the president, 25 for the House. So I think as long as you're 25 the day that you have to be sworn in, or maybe it's the day that you run for office, like do you have to be 25 to apply, or do you have to be 25 by the time you're sworn in? I don't know that. I don't know what the answer is on that. I think probably as long as you're 25 by the time you get sworn in, it's probably good enough for me. But I don't know the answer to that, honestly. I would just double check that. Regardless, I think it's fantastic that you're even thinking about the idea of running for office. I mean, I wish more people would do it because it takes a lot, right? It takes a lot of fortitude, a lot of stomach. You think you have to have a lot of willingness to just sort of open yourself up to the world and take criticism from every which way. So as I'm trying to think back myself if I were 25 and I wanted to run for the House of Representatives, where would my deficiencies be? Where do I think that I would have needed when I was 25 to sort of create some momentum for myself or some credibility for myself? And I think what I probably would have needed would be a couple things. One, a real strong education. I don't think I knew enough at 25. I probably don't think that I still know enough now, but I haven't set my sight on running for office. But I think I would get really familiar with the procedures. How does this stuff work? So I don't even know the answer to that question. You have to be 25 when you run or when you get elected. I don't know, right? But if I was running for office, I would know that very well. I would know all of the ins and outs of the local state statutes, how they work, what your deadlines are, when you need to have to apply, how many signatures do you need to get past the initial hurdle. All of those little details, I think I would know those inside and out. In other words, I would know the rules better than my opponent. That would be sort of step one. And then really get granular on that and put out a plan and then start working towards it. The other thing that I would really sort of encourage, or what I would be doing, is getting crystal clear on what my political philosophy was. What does that look like? And structuring that. It's more than just having sort of a vague idea about, well, I like freedom and I like, less government and I like less taxes and those things, but why? And really sort of take that back down. Where does that stem from? Do you think that most people, human nature of most individuals, do you think it's good? Do you think it's bad? Do you think that reality is subjective, objective? What's your philosophical sort of makeup? How do you think that this world functions? And then on that, once you get crystal clear on how that looks, or at least what fits right for you, I think it's going to change dramatically over the course of your life. Mine changes dramatically. But it's something where at least you can start thinking in those terms. Because once you have an understanding of what you're doing, and if you're doing things for the right reason, I think that's going to lead to a lot of fortification for you. And you're going to be in a position as a future politician where you're going to be bombarded from every which way. And if you are not personally fortified, if you don't know why you're doing these things, I think it's going to be very easy for you, maybe not you specifically, Matthew, but for most people to get knocked off their butts, because politics is brutal. And I think a lot of politicians, I think a lot of the problems we have is that they're not really fortified. They're kind of wishy-washy. They're just kind of doing everything that suits them politically, and they're not really grounded in any firm principles. So if you can be grounded in firm principles, know why you're doing, what you believe in, then I think that's going to set you up for success. I would read. I would write, and I would speak constantly. And you have to get that. You have to get the repetitions in on that. If you're going to be a politician in front of the camera on YouTube or something, you got to know how to articulate. You got to be able to put together a coherent sentence, and you got to get repetitions in, right? Every time you go to the gym, you get a little bit stronger. Every time you have a public speaking event, you get a little bit better, and you're going to work through a lot of those anxieties, and that's going to make you a strong man and a strong candidate, a strong spouse, a strong father. It's all good stuff. I'm excited for you, Matthew. Thank you for asking the question. I'm humbled that you would ask me. I've never run for office. Probably won't, but I appreciate that you would even think about my input. So I wish you the best of luck. Hope you do stick around so that we can support you when you run. We have another one from Ratch, who says, I'm so scared of what's coming. I legit can't do anything but worry over this. Please help bring some clarity of a worst case scenario. So Rach, I think is maybe Rach. I understand totally what you're saying. There are a lot of people in this country who are very, very concerned about what is happening right now. And you should be, right? I'm concerned about it as well. It's politics. It's our lives. The government runs a lot that unfortunately we have to deal with on a daily basis. But government isn't life. we've had this conflation in recent decades where people think that their lives are sort of orchestrated or so just connected with government that anything that happens in Washington is automatically going to trickle down and impact you. And most of the time that doesn't really happen, right? There's only sort of a couple different ways that the federal government regularly touches our lives, and that's in taxes. And, some of the COVID stuff has really escalated that. But, is the country going to be over because Joe Biden's the president? I don't think so at all, right? Is it going to be over because Donald Trump is president? No. In every single election that we have, we hear that from one side or the other. And I think it's just hysteria, right? It's a lot of people who are trying to sell you something. And remember this fear pellet is extremely powerful. Every time you go on the news, every time you go on the Drudge Report or CNN or turn on CNN or whatever it is that you do to get your news, and there's that fear, it's a pellet. And if you go and you press that button to get another fear pellet, you're going to be addicted to that stuff very quickly. And it's going to just rewire your brain a little bit, truthfully. So I would encourage you to just kind of step back from some of this stuff. In my men's group, we've worked with guys who will come to us all just sort of wrapped around the axle, really, really just hurting in a dangerous position. And what we'll do is sort of dissect some of those claims. We'll sort of peel the layers back of the onion and see what's really going on there. And what we find is that a lot of people who are in sort of these bad cycles of fear and anxiety are kind of, I hate to say it, but kind of bringing it on themselves. Every time you go on Facebook and see those angry posts or turn on Twitter or turn on CNN and you're just consuming this horrendous news, that's the news saying, come back, let me give you another pellet. You press that button, you get a pellet. Keep coming back because they want to sell you more advertising. They want to get you riled up and they want to lead you into a cause that they think is ripe for your programming. They don't sell advertisements. They don't get people coming back if you're just complacent and you're very happy and you're content with your life and you just say, yeah, everything's pretty good. Joe Biden's doing whatever the hell he's doing over there in Washington, but my life's good. Got a job, got money in the bank, food's on the table. As long as you have those basic necessities, I think that we're all just going to be fine. It's just sort of a one symbolic figurehead replacing another one. Everything's going to continue to go on. So I really, I'd encourage you to just sort of maybe put some context around what's going on. This is all going to be over in, a couple months. We'll move on to the next problem. Hope that helps. Don't know if it does, Rich, but I wish you well. I really do hope you're okay because I know there's a lot of people out there who feel the same way that you do. But remember, our government is not our lives. We have a lot more autonomy and a lot more control over our lives. It feels like we don't because every single day we wake up, they tell us that we don't, right? Everywhere we go is like this mingling between the government and big corporations and our lives. But what's important in our lives, right? It's family, it's love, it's health, it's wellness, it's some of the finer things in life like financial security, having a home, having a nice dog. Those are the things that are really important. What these idiots do, with $2.4 trillion, sending money to Nepal and stuff, it sucks. It's stupid. But what can we do about that? We can live our lives and live well. We have Zach Daughtry who says, what are some of your preferred news sources between you and Ben Shapiro? I've been able to completely abandon the mainstream media. Keep up the great work. Well, thanks, Zach. I really appreciate that. It's humbling to be mentioned in the same sentence as Ben Shapiro. I listen to him sometimes. He's I think brilliant and he's very good at what he does. Largely, I listen to sort of a varied mix of news. So I kind of don't follow, one person particularly. That's not true. Scott Adams, actually, I listen to him probably every single morning, most mornings, maybe 4 or 5 days a week. I listen to Scott Adams. First thing in the morning, he's on Twitter. He's also got a YouTube channel. I think he's great. I disagree with him probably half the time, which is why I listen to him because he makes me think a little bit differently. And I think that's a good thing. Other people, where do I get my news? I get a lot of my news from Twitter. I'm on it a lot, too much. Okay. But I've gotten off of Facebook and Instagram and the others just so I can really have my Twitter time. But it is still too much. But once again, I still try to stay focused around it. I don't want to be on there all the time. I use it with a purpose, usually for this show prep, sometimes just to kind of, read some news. But any good follows on Twitter? Let me think. Yeah, I mean, I like contrarian people. I like contrarian news sources. I like people who just don't regurgitate the same stuff. Anytime that I can predict what somebody's going to say, I really don't like to listen to that person too much because it just is boring. Right? Why do you want to hear somebody who's just regurgitating the same talking points over and over? So Scott Adams, I think, would be good. I do like the Epic Times. I think a viewer actually turned me onto that website. I like some of their writing. I think it's a different viewpoint. When I do my show prep, I open up a bunch of different news sites. So I have a folder on my Chrome in my Chrome browser that I just right click and I open them all up, and it's kind of everything. So I have subscriptions to a number of the different news sites like Washington Post, New York Times, just so I can kind of get back behind their paywall. And then I also will check out like the Epic Times, anything that's on Twitter, mostly my news sources. I don't watch almost any mainstream media news at all, or even go to their websites if I can help it. So there's a lot of alternatives out there, and I appreciate you, Zach. Thanks for that question, and thanks for tuning in so regularly. We have Brooke Pelton, who says, let's see, Rob, thank you so much for the existence sheet. I feel ready to take on the new year, feeling so much more productive. You're the best. Keep it up. Thanks, Brooke. I appreciate that. So on New Year's Day, if you missed it, we did an existence system, kind of like a little workshop. So I didn't talk any news or politics. I just wanted to share sort of my productivity methodology, because I've shared it with some people at the office and gotten some good feedback about it. So I just wanted to make that available for you. So thanks, Brooke. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And I'm hoping you have a rockin' new year as a result. We have Chris Owen, who says, my wife and I travel the country in a semi-truck. We tune into your show every night. We were able to be in the DC area to attend the rally Wednesday. That's awesome, Chris. Man, thank you so much for that. That's great. I'm glad that you're out there. I hope you stay safe. I'm not sure what your plans are if you're going to be there throughout this week, but I'm going to guess probably so. Maybe not. Maybe you're just driving through, but that's awesome. That's a nice compliment. I'm glad that you guys are listening and tuning in, and I appreciate the support. Drive safely out there. We have another one from Sharon, who says, regarding the phone call, I didn't think you could record something without telling the other person they are being recorded, then to make it public. This is from Sharon. Sharon says, if there are lawyers there, and then it was published, isn't that a violation of attorney-client privilege? So very good question, Sharon, and some of the same things that I was thinking about. I was even thinking about it in sort of a broader context, right? Like the president has executive privilege. There's a lot of executive privilege that exists when he's talking about executive branch of the government business. And so I was thinking, well, does that exist? Probably not, because this is sort of outside of the operation of the government. This is, private candidate Trump running for office, talking to a private state entity. And so, attorney-client privilege is one of those things that has a lot of nuance in it. But if this were not a settlement conference, and if they were claiming that this was not that, I think that it clearly was. I think that Trump's lawyers clearly thought it was. Then, in my mind, what they did was not so much a violation of attorney-client privilege as much as it was sort of just unethical. It wasn't something. It's not. If I brought my client in and had a candid, open conversation with a prosecutor who was opposing, right, trying to incriminate our client, and my client made some admissions, or I made some admissions. If I said, hey, yeah, he did this, here's why he did it though, because he was trying to avoid harming this person or avoid trying to present that harm. And if I disclose that to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor turned around and said, okay, well, listen, judge, I'm gonna, this is what he told me, or he went and told the jurors about that, or he published it with the Washington Post, I'd be furious and I'd file a bar complaint. And we would see what the bar would do about that, because it'd be a violation of ethics, right? It's a settlement conference. The purpose of having that is to settle things. It's to be open and candid. And in fact, in many negotiation documents, we'll even put at the very top, like, this is for the purposes of settlement negotiation. We're trying to negotiate. If you're not comfortable with that, don't read the rest of the document. It's prefacing the conversation as saying this is supposed to be protected and privileged. We want to be candid. We want to encourage more of those conversations. So, I'm not sure that it was a violation of attorney-client privilege, because Raffensperger and his team, they were not Trump's attorneys. So attorney-client privilege sort of, you invoke that. But when you bring somebody else into the conversation, you waive that right. So for example, if we're representing somebody, we have attorney-client privilege with that person. If they bring in their spouse into the room, we don't represent their spouse. Or let's say it's a girlfriend, not a married couple. That makes the facts easier. It's a girlfriend. Bring her in. She overhears the conversation. We now don't have attorney-client privilege over that conversation anymore. Okay, that's sort of the quick and dirty of it. So if Donald Trump was now speaking freely to other people who were not his attorneys, then he doesn't get to suddenly turn around and invoke attorney-client privilege. I think the better argument is that this was happening in the confines of a settlement conversation, and they breached that. I think it's unethical. But that's politics. We've got S. Austin who says, Rob, we really enjoy your show. Keep up the good work. You are doing a great service for the public by hosting this show. Thanks, S. Austin. I appreciate that. Thanks for the love and the support, my friend. We have Teresa Child who says the difference between this October surprise and the Hunter October surprise is that the media is blowing this one up. Hunter's laptop crickets. Exactly right. Exactly. We talked about Hunter Biden here. Largely, I was so angry about it because nobody else was covering it. Right? Not that, I mean, it was an interesting story, but it was something that we really hit hard because literally nobody else was talking about it. And it was just infuriating. And so we just said, okay, we'll talk about it again. Let's talk about it again. Sure, we'll talk about it again today. This one, everybody's talking about it because it hurts Trump. Why wouldn't they? We have another one from Luis. Trump did the phone call as a trap so that the Secretary of State could make his own grave. Trump team was already looking forward to Wednesday. That's one interpretation about it. And if you read the transcript closely, I didn't clip anything out on this yet. I might, but Trump is indicating in this conversation, he actually references this, I think twice, where he says something like, listen, I could just blow the lid on this whole thing. Right? He says something to that effect. Like, I have enough evidence here. I could just, tear the world down. I don't want to tear the world down. I just want 11,000 votes. Sort of hinting that there is a much bigger thing out there. But he didn't go into it. He just sort of glanced over that twice. So I didn't want to spend too much time on that because it was, who knows? Is it hyperbole or does he really have something? We'll see on Wednesday. James Burnett says, why is it that the legislative branches, along with the judicial branches, are not being the fail-safes that they were designed to be? Why are they throwing it out on standing? It's a great question, James. And, some people say that this is sort of this coordinated collusion, that all of the courts all over the country are all compromised. They're all at risk. They're all working against Donald Trump. They're all biased. I just don't see that. I think that there's a different explanation for it. Courts really, really, really don't like to weigh in on election issues. They don't like to weigh in on political issues. Okay, we've talked about this a lot, even before the election, that the only real authority that the court has is based in its legitimacy. If the court has to be seen as legitimate. If it's not seen as legitimate, they lose a lot of their power. And you see this with the various chief justices that have existed throughout our country's history. They're all sort of overall consumed with this idea. We've seen a lot of it with Chief Justice Roberts. Barack Obama got elected. He was supposedly a conservative judge, but he was the vote that enacted Obamacare. Why? Well, my opinion, it's just speculation, is because he was scared of undermining the court's legitimacy by throwing out the first African-American president's domestic policy issue on a court technicality. He didn't want to do that, so he twisted himself in a pretzel, bent over backwards in order to call Obamacare a tax. I think it really hurt the court, but I think what his sort of calculation was that this is going to save the legitimacy of the court. So it's a political decision, right? And they just don't want to get involved in the election stuff. They just say, look, the people voted. It is what it is. Deal with it, right? Deal with the politics in the political realm. The court realm is the judicial realm. And so you're going to see judges just as a matter of, going to law school and being a practicing lawyer for however long these judges have been lawyers for, a long time. They're just sort of indoctrinated with this idea that the political questions should be left out of the courts and dealt with in the political sphere. And we're seeing just how problematic that doctrine is right now, because there are a lot of questions that, in my opinion, the courts should have gotten involved in. Don't know that it would have changed anything, but it would have made our analysis as American citizens much easier. We could have now said, okay, well, we have another election coming up here pretty soon. Got one coming up in 2 years and then another one 4 years after that. So we want to know, can courts just modify the state legislature laws? Can election commissions, can Secretary of States like Brad Raffensperger enter into a settlement agreement with the Democrats that fundamentally change the rules, even though the legislature in a previous session has said you have to do things this way? They said, no, the settlement agreement supersedes what the legislature wants to do. So is that allowed or not? We're going to have the same question again in 2 years and another one in 4. Would have been good to have a decision on that, but the courts totally abdicated their responsibility. Nothing came from them on this whole issue. So what is Congress supposed to do? They could have decided this stuff a long time ago. Blame the courts. We have another one from Sammy Elliott. It says, Wisconsin Supreme Court docketed Trump case today. Is that good? I don't know. I have to look into that, Sammy. I'm not familiar with that one. We have covered so many lawsuits now, it's hard to keep track of them. I think that, this idea here at this point in time that any one of these lawsuits is going to do anything is probably gone. We're sort of at that point. Unless something comes out tomorrow, January 6th is going to be the big day. So, there are a number of Supreme Court cases in the U.S. Supreme Court, not just in Wisconsin, that are on the docket, but the response dates are due back in, at the end of January, after presumably the next president is already inaugurated. So kind of a little too late for a lot of these court cases. We have another one from Sharon. Says, regarding the electoral vote, how can they certify these conflicting votes when the very legality of the election and the votes are in question? So yeah, they've certified them. I mean, that's just what they did. So they're saying that the legality of the election and the votes are not in question because the states certified them. So, for example, in Arizona, what we did here is we had some rules in place where immediately after an election, they have to do a spot audit. I think they check 1% of each precinct or each vote tabulation center, whatever the numbers are. They do a spot check, like a spot audit, and they match some numbers. They do a little bit of a magic, and boom, it's certified, right? And they have some safe harbor deadlines, which are set on December 8th. Then we have the actual signing ceremonies on the 14th. At that point in time, they're done. So they as far as they're concerned, there is nothing else to contest. So they certify them, they send them in. That's the end of the story. So now that their role is done, they threw the ball. Now Congress is catching the ball. What are they going to do with that? Well, the only recourse, the only safety pressure relief valve that exists under our law is for them to object, hold their own hearings, and make a decision, which is what we're going to see in 2 days. We have another one from Beth Coddington, who says, good evening, Bobbert. Beth back with the Bobbert. I like it. And Faith says, if massive amounts of evidence are presented in front of America on January 6th, do you think it would harm members of Congress to ignore it at that point? Yeah, I mean, yes. So that's sort of, the big fireworks that everybody's expecting, right? On January 6th, Trump and his team present enough evidence to these different congressional people that they just go, oh my goodness. When the American people see this, they're going to be so angry that I have no choice. There's nothing else I can do except vote to throw out these votes, right? It'd have to be something very consequential in order for them to do it. And, whether we're going to see that or not, who knows? Trump in his tweet said that we're going to. We've had, some other indications that there may be more, but we just don't know. But it would need to be something consequential that would rattle enough people. And remember, it's got to rattle them hard, because in the House of Representatives, you would need to get some Democrats who would flip. And the idea here that Democrats are going to break from Nancy Pelosi, in my mind, is just a long shot. She keeps her caucus tight. Those people do not stray. We even saw she got reelected, even though AOC and all of the other ones in that group, they all voted for her. They had a lot of criticisms against her, but when push comes to shove, when it's time to put up, they do every time. Don't know what she does. She's got some magical powers in there, but Nancy Pelosi gets people in line. We have Kay Bean, who says, Lady Justice blindfolded and missing an arm. Yeah. It's unfortunate what we saw out of our justice system. Didn't see much of anything, really. Latches, standing, mootness, ripeness. All procedural BS. That's how this was mostly decided. We have Aaron, who says, in your opinion, have you seen any reasonable response to the State Farm Arena video? If this video was brought up in a courtroom, would it be enough to convince a judge? So, video evidence is tricky and questionable. I mean, what you need to do is you got to lay foundation. You got to get that admitted. And then you need to really, kind of bring those people in, I would think, to discuss what was going on. So, if you just submitted a video to a judge is going to go, okay, that's a great video, but it's got no context, right? I need a lot more context. And so, you'd have to present witnesses and present some evidence, because think about it this way. When you're presenting evidence in front of a court, the sort of fundamental underlying rule is that evidence is more credible if it's subject to cross-examination. And that means the opposing side gets to ask questions about it. So let's say, for example, I'm representing somebody in a case, and The state government brings up their witness. They say, okay, well, this officer said my client did something. Okay, so that officer has his ability to get up there and testify about whatever he or she saw. That evidence, in order for a jury to determine whether that's reliable or not, is subject to me cross-examining the officer. So now the government gets to ask that officer some questions. Officer, isn't it true that you're amazing and you're the best officer and you never do anything wrong and you've been doing this for 25 years and you're just incredible. You're like Captain America. We love you, right? That's all the prosecutor is going to do. I get to come out there and say, well, isn't it true this? And isn't it true that? And don't you have this? And doesn't your procedural manual tell you to do that differently? And so on, right? I have a whole list of questions. I get to cross-examine him. I get to challenge his evidence. I get to basically call him on all his BS and present a different set of facts to the jury that they wouldn't otherwise present. It's really hard to cross-examine a video. You can't, because they can't answer any questions. And so that type of evidence is generally disfavored. They want to bring in the actual witnesses and they want to provide some context and lay some foundation around the video. So, any type of evidence that is just as simple as that, like, an affidavit or a declaration or a video, you need a little bit more. As I've been saying for a long time here, that that's enough to sort of get you to the next domino. It's kind of the first domino in motion. It says, okay, this is enough. You're right. This video it's problematic. Could be a simple explanation for it, but all right. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grant your subpoena to call in that witness. I'm going to set another evidentiary hearing in 60 days. Government, you're ordered to give the defense or to give Team Trump the original recordings. The full day for 24 hours. They want the full videos. They want a chain of custody documents. Who transferred that over? Where did it come from? They want to be able to inspect the equipment. All of that stuff. But it's the first domino that will then knock the other series of dominoes down the line that may lead to some more evidence or a full-blown evidentiary hearing with witnesses or a full trial, which we have not seen yet. So it's a good question, and it sort of dives into the nuance of some of the law. We got Beth Coddington, who says, unfortunately, the people who listen to the lamestream media are going to believe these accusations. Sadly, I have 2 sisters among them. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, headline, copy and paste journalism. They see a headline, boom, copy it, paste it right in their head. That's the full amount of thinking that many people, unfortunately, engage in. And we're sort of hoping to change some of that with this program, with this format, with this show. So thank you for helping spread the word about that, Beth. We have Unknown Sheep who says, hey, been following you for a while over here in Sweden. My goodness. I think we got a couple people from Sweden. We have, this is a global issue. Keep up the great work. Is Congress allowed to take a break, go home and sleep on the 6th? So yeah, I think so. I didn't see anything in the rules about that. I think they can adjourn. They probably will. I'm not sure that we're going to get an answer on the 6th. I'm really not sure. If it's something where they object to multiple states, Arizona. So the rules say that you get 2 hours to debate the topics. So 2 hours for Arizona, 2 hours for Florida, 2 hours for Georgia, 2 hours for Wisconsin, 2 hours for Michigan, 2 hours for Pennsylvania. That's 6 states times 2 hours. That's 12 hours. I'm terrible at math, but I think I nailed that one. And, that's a full day. Then they got to vote. I think they're not starting until 1 o'clock post meridian, whatever that is. Is that 9 a.m. here? I don't know what the meridian is, but it depends when they start, when they end. And really the only deadline there is that if there's no president decided by the 20th, we're looking at Miss Pelosi. We better get an answer. We got another one from Aaron who says, the Constitution says count the votes lawfully certified. Trump still has multiple lawsuits claiming that the votes have been unlawfully certified, and these cases are still pending. Shouldn't we have to wait for the final results from the courts before counting the certified votes in question? I understand that January 6th is the date Congress is supposed to have this joint session. Shouldn't the pending litigation be more important than the date the electoral votes are counted? What's the big deal if we wait another 2 weeks or 2 to count the votes, especially if it would ensure that the votes were actually lawfully certified? It's a great question, Aaron, and the reason why is because that's what the rules say. The rules are written. So we got to abide by the rules, right? I'm kind of a stickler for that. So if we see it written in there, we got to have something done by January 3rd. We got to have by January 6th. We got to have an inauguration by January 20th. Those are the rules. And that is really the only incentive to accelerate a lot of this litigation. So I understand what you're asking to do, but the problem here would be, well, we could just have the courts keep pushing litigation out inevitably for the foreseeable future, and we never get to it. So you can have sort of a precedent for life just based on pending litigation. And so that's not a good standard either. You'd want something that would sort of say, look, the courts have a certain amount of time to resolve this stuff. If not, we're going to take it away from them and we're going to give it to somebody else. In this case, we've done that. We're saying we're going to take it away from the courts then. If they're not going to settle on this stuff, it's fine. We'll just deal with it in Congress. And that's exactly what's happening. Cruz is doing it. We got some House representatives who are doing it. That's the mechanism. That's why it's in there. That's why they wrote it. It's not just a suggestion. It's in there as a mechanism to be used. Now they're using it. People are calling them traitors because they don't know what the hell they're talking about. We have Raja Sakar who says, thanks. Didn't know Brainard had a rebuttal. Also read somewhere 2 dead votes is from a batch of 1,500 voters. Is that correct? Can Trump sue the Washington Post? So, Trump could sue them, but Trump's a public figure. He's talking about the election stuff. They're reporting their version of the news. I don't think it amounts to, any defamation or anything like that. I don't know where those 2 dead votes came from, whether it was from a batch of 1,500 voters or not. But, the bigger takeaway I thought was how sort of difficult they were being with a lot of the information. Brad and his team, they just did not want to give any information over. They just said, can you just send us some info? They're like, well, we'll see about it. Well, we'll talk to our lawyers. We'll see what we can get on the calendar. We'll circle back. You ever have somebody tell you that? Yeah, let's circle back on that. Or we'll figure that out. Okay, well, let's figure it out now. Are we having lunch tomorrow or not? Well, I'll hit you up next week. You never hear back from that person. They're that person. Raffensperger is. We've got Cyrell Herv who says some GOP newly elected members didn't contest their own elections. How hypocritical. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what this new Congress looks like. Thanks, Cyril. We have Kifa who says, Rob, if Pence says when he comes to states having dueling electors that he's not sure which to accept, can he ask the issue to be sent back to the state legislatures to decide? Thoughts? So no, I don't see anything in the rules that say that he can do that. I mean, it's an interesting idea, but really, I think the only mechanism he has here is to pick one. Like there's no other rules there. It says he gets to count the votes, which seem to be regularly given and duly certified, or whatever the language from the Electoral Count Act is. That's it. There's no governing provision on what that looks like and, how to decide. There is some other language from different parts of that Electoral Count Act, which I think are talking about if, let's say, for example, I'm trying to think now, if one state has 2 slates of electors, there are some provisions on which ones to accept. We went through that, but I just don't remember which one it is. I don't think that this is going to be an issue, which is why I haven't spent a ton of time on it. I don't think that Mike Pence is going to pick any electors that are not certified by the state. I just don't see it. And the reason being, I think arguably he has some power to do that. He gets to decide, but it's interesting that the lawsuit, the Louis Gohmert lawsuit, was thrown out, and they were arguing basically to say that Pence had the total unequivocal ability to make that decision. I don't think that he does, nor do I think we would want him to, because eventually there's going to be Vice President Kamala, who's the president of the Senate, who's going to get to pick the next president. And if we only care about whoever that person picks, we don't want to live in that country. So it's a good question. I think he's going to pick all the certified votes, and he's going to leave it up to the members to make objections and then argue the objections on their own in their own respective houses. Thanks. We have Rajesh Shakar, who says, your thoughts on Robert Barnes' Twitter account hack. Yeah, I follow Robert Barnes, and I also follow Viva Frey. And I saw Viva post this. He says, just a heads up, Robert Barnes just told me his Twitter account has been hacked and deleted. He's in touch with Twitter support, but they haven't responded yet. 5 hours later, and I think Viva actually posted today that he's still suspended. So it's been like 3 days. Oh, there he is. I am back. Many thanks to Jack Cernovich, People's Pundit, Viva Frey, and the many others who got Twitter to restore my account. So there he is. Mr. Barnes is back. Welcome back. We're glad to have you. Twitter just isn't the same without Robert Barnes. So we're glad he's back. We've got Joshua Leonard who says, Tom Cotton needs to understand representatives need to be the voice of their constituents. 75 million people have spoken who voted for you and your party, Tom. You have an obligation, sir. Yeah. And Joshua, I think you're right about that, right? I mean, this is, you're seeing how the segmentation of the Republican Party is happening before us. Some are going very middle of the road. We've got Ben Sasse. We've got Tom Cotton, who are going middle moderate. Remember, all of these people want to be president. So they're carving out their position in a future GOP party. Ben Sasse is going to the middle. Tom Cotton's going to the middle. Ted Cruz going to the right. We've got Josh Hawley going to the right. Tuberville and a lot of these other individuals are going to the right. So they're just sort of being segmented out. And Tom Cotton, Ben Sasse, even though they're not up, I don't know when Tom Cotton's up for re-election, but Ben Sasse, he just got elected. Okay, so he was Team Trump when he needed to get elected, needed those coattails to help him get another 6 years in the Senate. As soon as he gets those 6 years, boom, I'm good. Don't need it anymore. Now he's going to race to the middle in order to oppose. He doesn't have a primary coming up, but a lot of these other senators do, and they may be primaried by people who want free and fair elections. We will see. We have Grandma's Place, who says, in rivers and bad government, the lightest things float to the top. I like that. Grandpa's Place. Look at that with some wisdom. In rivers and bad government, the lightest things float to the top. Man, that's a deep thought right there. Thanks, Grandpa. We've got Zara PhD, who says Poland proposed a bill to fine Facebook for censoring its citizens. Candace Owens suing the fact checkers. Any insights? Thanks for this great show. So Zara, no, you know what? I didn't even know about that. I saw Candace Owens was trending on Twitter today, but I don't know what that was about. And there's apparently a lawsuit going on. So that'll be fun. I've got a big problem with big tech. I think that they have been a part of the let's say, institutional systemic defrauding of our electoral system with all their censorship and all their algorithmic manipulations. And it's a little bit troubling. So I will be happy to look into that. I've been sort of aggressively pro 230 reform on this channel, with bearing in mind that we know that our elected officials aren't going to do anything about it. Nothing. But I will be curious to see if any of these lawsuits pick up momentum. Thanks, Zara. Appreciate you being here. We have CNE Barker says, what's your thought on the effect Jovan Hutton Pulitzer has on this situation based upon his forensic paper expertise? So Jovan Pulitzer, I think, was the star of all of this. He was one of my favorite legislative hearing witnesses. He was outstanding. The whole thing was just so good to watch. I might watch it again. It was very good. The guy was articulate as hell, and he had great analogies. He was able to explain this complicated stuff in very dumbed down layman's terms, highly entertaining, and had good information on top of it. Now, the problem with Jovan's testimony is that it was all speculation, right? He was saying, look, if you give me access to this paper, I can tell you if it was fraudulent or not. You got to give me access, though. I'll be able to tell you in 5 hours. I can do 200,000 ballots in 5 hours, something like that, right? No problem. But is he going to get that information? Is he going to get access to it? The Senate committee there in Georgia granted him access to it, and my understanding is now they're being opposed with lawsuits. Nobody wants to give him that information, as far as I can tell. I haven't checked that story basically since last week, so I'm not up to speed on it, but it was a very exciting witness. He was very, very good. I loved watching it. I learned stuff from it, and I thought it was fascinating as hell, but that's not electoral fraud. He's saying I can go find it. I could tell you immediately if I could find it, but he didn't present it. He just said, I'm open to looking for it. But I would still check it out nonetheless. Jamie Zaleff says, what happens when the seats of the Republicans who have recently died? Does the GOP now need to win both runoffs to keep control of the Senate? So I haven't seen, it's a good question, Jamie. I have not seen any federal Republican senators die from COVID. These were local level state people. May they rest in peace. It was a weird thing that happened. There was like 4 different GOP senators, Republicans, who or state legislature people, local senators, local representatives who died of COVID, 4 in a row. Boom, 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 within a week. It was crazy. I saw somebody just sort of consolidated all of the different deaths on a Twitter post, and I was like, my goodness, that is really weird. So, that's not going to impact the Senate race. But yes, the Republicans do have to win both Senate seats. Right now, the Senate is 52 Republicans, 48 Democrats. And if they lose those 2 Senate seats tomorrow, it's 50-50 now. Guess who the tiebreaker is? Kamala Harris, the vice president of the Senate, provided that Joe Biden takes the White House, right? Provided that everything goes as they're predicting it goes. If Donald Trump wins, and Mike Pence is still the vice president of the country and the president of the Senate, then it's a 50-50 split if they lose both, but Mike Pence is the tiebreaker. Good question. We have another one from Ron B. Wow, where is Wolfgang tonight? He must have lost his glasses. Oh, breaking, new Marine One has landed in Dalton, Georgia for the rally. Yeah, where the hell is Wolfgang? Haven't seen any Wolfgang, but that's all right. Wolfgang is probably getting some much needed rest and relaxation. And it looks like, my friends, that was our very last super chat. Thanks, Ron B, for that. Appreciate you being here. There is a rally going on in Georgia. Going to be a lot of election news tomorrow, so we're probably going to cover some of that. If you have not, if you missed some of the prior shows, we were talking about some of the election litigation going on. There was a judge. Her name is Judge Abrams Gardner. And her last name's Gardner, but her middle name is, or her sort of hyphenated last name is Abrams. She's closely related to Stacey Abrams, who is very, very big in the Democratic Party in Georgia. So there's litigation going on there. And, unless tomorrow's a blowout, a decided victory one way or the other, we may be in the middle of more litigation about that. I certainly hope not. We've been covering enough election lawsuits. So hopefully we can change a little bit and get back to some more interesting things. But if we are going to be in more legal hot water coming out of the gates tomorrow, you can better believe that we'll be here and we'll be covering it. So that is it for the show, my friends. Couple quick reminders. If you have not already done so, we would love a subscribe to the channel. We have a lot of fun doing the show, and the subscriber number is it's kind of a cool metric. We just like to follow along as that thing goes up. It's exciting, keeps us motivated, keeps us hungry, wanting to keep coming back and being with you. It's just a lot of fun. We'd also love a like, a share, a thumbs up on the video. That's always helpful. When we talk about this election stuff, YouTube has told us that they sort of disfavor some of the election conversations going on. So they kind of put us in this little bit of a bubble on YouTube so that we can't, go reach out and connect with other people. So a share would be just very much appreciated. If we have good conversations here and you want to invite somebody to be a part of it, that would mean the world to us. We are also going to put the slides that I just went through in our Discord server. That's available for free. Discord is just a chat room. So you can find the link in the description, get a copy of the show notes in there, and you can get a copy of my book as well. My book is free. It's in there. There's a PDF of this one. It's called Beginning to Winning: How to Fight Your Case and Succeed in the Criminal Justice System. There is yours truly on the back, and it's free. So just go in there and get a copy of that PDF file if you'd like it. If you want to get it on Amazon, it's available there as well. I would love a review if you found it helpful, useful, or interesting. It has a little bit about me and sort of why I do what I do and some of my philosophy at the outset of the book itself. Other than that, that's all we've got. We have a law firm here, by the way. I always forget to mention that, but that's what we do. That's our day job. Every day we have a whole team of people who loves to help good people who've been charged with crimes navigate through the criminal justice system. We do not believe that society is benefited when people come out of the system worse than they went in. It's not good for anybody. We want to help people through it, get their lives back on track, and just find some peace and comfort, find safety, clarity, and hope in their lives and for their future. And that's what we do. So we would be honored if you happen to know anybody who needed some criminal legal help in the state of Arizona. We offer free case evaluations. We are really very good at what we do, and we'd be honored to accept a referral from you. So, it's free case evaluation. If anybody needs any help, we'd be happy to help. So that's it for me, my friends. I want to invite you to come back tomorrow. We're going to be back here. We're going to be covering all of the election stuff. And then Wednesday, all of the electoral stuff. We're going to do it at the same time. Shows maybe a little bit longer. We'll see. But it's going to be right back here. It's 5 p.m. Arizona time, Mountain time. It's going to be 4 p.m. on the West Coast, 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. on the East Coast. We want to make sure you are here and with us. So one more time, thank you so much for being a part of the program. I will see you back here tomorrow night. Have a great evening. Sleep well. Bye-bye.